Right, I will now, there we go. I will now call the Estacada City Council meeting to order. If you'll please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, if I could have roll call, please.
Yeah, Counselor Dunsmuir. Counselor Hughes,
Here.
Counselor Litke,
Here.
Counselor McElroy,
Here.
Counselor Strobel,
Here.
Counselor Tenbush,
Here.
Mayor Drinkwine.
Here, thank you very much for that. Okay, we are at the first citizen and community group comment. And I have one, let me see, maybe two in front of me. We'll start off with Jim Moriarty.
All right. Thank you all. Jim Moriarty. Was East Councilor. Oakview Lane, Estacada. Hello, Mr. Mayor, City Council, and good evening. As I was reviewing the minutes from the last City Council meeting, I saw several of the councilors' notes stating that they were disappointed. It didn't hit me until I read these statements. Well, I'm disappointed in the Estacada City Council. I'm disappointed that Councilor Dunsmuir tabled the appointments for a committee of volunteers during the council meeting 1 month ago, and then walks out of the city council 2 weeks ago, 27 minutes early, before voting on 2 items of city business because she didn't get her way. The first item of business were the appointments for the Traffic and Public Safety Committee, comprising of 7 volunteers. The second item was a variance of a Halloween event for children. I show up and participate for this city, and we expect the same from you. Look at the audience. These are the citizens that care about the community. Remember that. Thank you. Let me speak to you.
Thank you. Okay, next I have Kurt Schweigert.
Hi, thank you for allowing me to speak. My name is Kurt Schweigert. I've been in Estacada for about pretty close to 9 years now. When I first moved here, the population of Estacada was below 4,000 people. We had dedicated law enforcement in this town. What's the city's red line in the sand with this population expansion where we can have dedicated law enforcement? I hold a different view than probably many of you. I was a cop in a small town. I was the chief of police. There's a big difference. And I'm speaking of these guys because these guys are the ones that are going to vote for the people that are going to make the change. There's a difference between having contract county law enforcement. How many of you guys live in town and open your windows up at 10 o'clock at night? You guys hear the racing all the time? We need dedicated law enforcement in this town during the daytime. Now that school's in session, 40 miles an hour up Main Street, 40 miles an hour across 6th Street. Somebody's going to get killed. And if I was a bad guy, and trust me, I could be a real good one, I would know that it's going to take at least 15 minutes to get somebody out here to Estacada. So if I wanted to do harm to a business or to a citizen in Estacada, I do it when I know there's nobody here, and there hasn't been anybody here for a long time. So thanks, guys.
Thank you. Okay, next I have Joanna Harbor.
Thank you, Mayor and council members. I'm here to speak to you regarding your sign ordinance and permit process. I am actually a resident just outside city limits, but I'm speaking on behalf of myself as a candidate, and I'm also speaking on residents of Estacada. I believe that the sign ordinance regarding political campaign signs is unconstitutional. It violates the First Amendment and freedom of speech. See, outside city limits, you don't have to apply for a permit. You just get to put your sign up as long as it's not blocking traffic. Here you have to pay a fee and you have to apply for a permit and wait for it to be accepted in order to exercise your First Amendment rights. That's not right. It shouldn't happen that way. So I'm here to ask that the council remove political signs from the part where you have to get permits. Yes, you can have reasonable time, place, and manner restrictions. However, to make people go through an extra step that other people do not puts your citizens at a disadvantage, especially for races that are in city limits only. And it affects all political parties, non-parties and nonpartisan and unaffiliated voters. It affects everybody. We should all be able to have free speech and do what we want politically on our own property, as long as it's reasonable, within time limit, and does not impede traffic or sidewalks, and it's on our actual property. So I'm here to respectfully request that you change that sign ordinance and remove political signs from the permit processing part and the fee to make your citizens on equal footing with the rest of Oregon. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next I have Brandy Licky.
While we're waiting for Brandy,
Go ahead.
is it okay if I respond real quick to the sign permit comment?
Yeah, Taylor. Yeah, go ahead.
Our sign code currently exempts political signs that are small enough. So if they're under 4 square feet in area, they are exempt from the application and fee and permit requirements. And so if you want more information on that, please email us at planning@cityofestacada.org and we can help you figure out how to get that permitted if it does require a permit.
Okay, thank you, Taylor. All right.
Hi, guys. I'm Brandy Licky. I wanted to echo a lot of what Jim said. I'm here at every meeting. Sometimes I'm very rarely, I'll miss one. I participate a lot and we expect our council to be respectful. And it was really disappointing last meeting to see what happened and to see it feels like it's been swept under the rug. I think it needs to be addressed and I think council behavior needs to be addressed. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, that is all the forms I have in front of me. So if you wish to speak on the second side, make sure that I receive it before the end here and I'll make sure you're on there. So thank you. Okay, we are now at the consent agenda. I have 2 things on it. I have the city council minutes for 2022 and a proclamation for Noah Lieberger. So can I get a motion?
Mayor, I'd like to have something amended on the council minutes. It's not identified on the council minutes at all where Councilor Dunsmere walked out. I'd like to have the time noted in there when she left the chambers.
Okay, we will put that noted.
Yes, we can go ahead and make that amendment. So if you want to approve it with that we'll make that amendment for you. We can do that.
Okay, I'm looking for a motion with an amended statement.
I move to approve the consent agenda with the amended council minutes to identify Councilor Dunsmere's exit.
Second.
Okay, I have a first and second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? Okay, motion passes. Thank you. Was that?
That was your echo.
Oh, okay, sorry. I heard my own self on the end of that. That was scary. Okay. I'm going to read the proclamation now. I think this was a really heartfelt proclamation. With as many youth as we've lost in a short amount of time, if you look around, we're always honoring, people for great things in life, but it's the ones that never get to enjoy that and get to go on and have those moments that we really get to honor today. So I'm going to read this proclamation. The proclamation starts out, whereas Noah Lieberger was born on Sunday, October 16, 2005, and whereas Noah attended Clackamas River Elementary and Estacada Middle School and Summit Learning Charter School, and whereas Noah played football and basketball through middle school and enjoyed the Estacada skate park where he excelled at skateboarding and riding scooters in his younger years. And whereas Noah had a passion for music and basketball and had been writing music since he was just a little guy, and was beginning to use his talents to pursue a future of writing music. And whereas Noah faced many hardships that a child should not have to go through, but continued to exhibit strength, determination, compassion until his passing on June 22nd, 2022. And whereas Noah will be remembered and clearly missed by his family and friends and community. Now, therefore, I, Sean Drinkwine, Mayor of Estacada, in remembrance of Noah on his 17th birthday, do hereby proclaim Sunday, October 16th, 2022, Noah Lieberger Day in Estacada. Dated this day, the 10th day of October, 2022. So I want to thank his mother, who is out in the audience. And I gotta say, I read a lot of these, and not always does it touch home, but this one did. You know, it's sad when we see our kids leave before us, you know, so we can appreciate your pain. I think all of us up here can. So I'd like to present this to you if I can, if you would please come up. All right. Now we're moving on to the department and committee reports. So I will start off in the commission. I will start off with Jerry. I'll start off with you.
Arts Commission met last week. There's a lot of good projects coming up from the Arts Commission, so look out for those. They have two more one-page Estacada events coming up November and December that are, you know, two more this year. If you haven't caught one yet, it's really a good event to come down to. And then this morning or this afternoon, DEIC met, and the reason I didn't have a lot of questions for the you know, during the workshop is because I sat through that same thing with the DEIC today, and I got all my questions answered during that that meeting. So but that's pretty much what they worked on today, was just that TSP, and it was a lot of good information and a lot of really good questions asked today from the DEIC committee. So it was good stuff. That's all I got.
Thank you, Jerry. Paul.
No meetings for me the past couple of weeks.
Okay, well, Joel.
The Downtown Estacada Commission met last week, and a couple of things. They now have co-chairs. So that's one thing. Second thing is there was talk about how they might progress forward with trying to get some of the information out about the different events and things they have, and they're talking more budget wise and stuff. So they're going to be looking at trying to do like door hangers and you know, other routes of social media, and trying to work with more nonprofits to get the word out, kind of using ways to try to expand notifications. And then there was a consideration as well, and some talk about kind of where they stand with doing certain events and or versus supporting events. But at this point, that's you know, they haven't come to anything solid on that. So
Great, thank you, Charity.
School board meets this Wednesday, but I do want to give them a little plug. Parents in the audience, if you check your email, there is a survey for all the schools. So I would encourage you to take that survey. It really gives the schools a lot of feedback and lets them know how they're doing, and then they can go from there.
Okay, thank you. And Mike, I know you don't have anything yet,
I
but
do.
oh, you have
Actually,
some?
We had a meeting for the infrastructure committee. There was a lot of information there. Took a good bit of notes. I'll try to hit the highlights. The Espinoza water pump station was completed. It supplies drinking water to the upper reservoir. The new reservoir on Lawrence Road. The first appraisal was done. Working on, I believe they're working on the permanent easement. It's behind schedule on construction, or I'm not sure if they're working on the permanent easement or if that's in place. My notes weren't clear there. They have a UV treatment and waste plant that's going to be 95% complete by the end of October. They're working on getting a new screw press to increase storage of solids at the existing facility. They spoke about the proposed new waste management site. Some side notes from that was just that the project will take approximately 4 years to start. Approximate capacity of the current treatment plant is at 80%. The new facility will include some odor mitigation as part of the plan. The capacity of the new facility would be a 300% increase from the current facility, or 6 million gallons per day capacity. As far as water usage, the water rights we currently, spoke on that as well. The water rights we currently have at the city is 2.6 million gallons per day. The max use in summer right now is currently 1.2 million gallons per day. Sorry, lots of notes. Briefly talked about the Helva extension project next summer. I didn't have much details on that. The existing shop for the public works, in order to extend the life of that, needs some repairs, including roof, siding, covered parking, in an attempt to get approximately 10 more years out of that facility before moving to another one if they choose to do that. And I think that's about it.
Okay, thank you. That's very informative. Appreciate that.
Might I ask a question here?
Oh, sure.
Did you say 4 years to start or 4 years to complete?
The notes I have down here, and I could be wrong, it says projected approximate 4 years to start.
Okay.
And correct me if I'm wrong on that, Melanie. Melanie was sitting in on that.
Yeah.
My notes could be wrong. There was a lot. I was trying to keep up with it.
That was a lot of notes. But yeah, it's 4 years to complete. We're hoping for 3 years, but things typically tend to take longer. So
Sorry.
4
Just
years.
wanted to make sure.
Yeah,
Thanks, Melanie.
yeah. Thank you for
Great,
clarifying.
great job, Councilmember.
All right, and I had no meetings. I was at the League of Oregon Cities, so I'll report on that during my comments later on. So we will move on to city manager's report.
Okay, and I know we have a lot to cover tonight, so I'm just going to share a couple of things. First of all, I emailed the council an update from our tourism partner with the chamber, and they had pointed out a variety of pages in the Mount Hood Territory Visitor Guide that we're going to highlight Estacada. And I'm not sure, since I'm not there tonight, if you had those magazines set at your places or not, but they are. If they're not, are they there? Perfect. Well, if you look through it, there's a lot of great stuff about Estacada in there, and a lot of that is thanks to the tourism work that is being provided through the chamber. And then I also wanted to share that the Oregon Main Street Conference was this at the same time as the League of Oregon Cities Conference. So we kind of weren't able to attend in the way we wanted to, but we received some awards. We got the Best Mixed Building Award for the Heritage Properties, the mixed use over beside Ace. And then a Creative Placemaking Award for the partnership with Ant Farm and Harmony Baked and their community garden, which I watched the video of that on the webpage, or the email that just came out again from the Oregon Main Street. And I need to get over there and take a look at that because it looks pretty phenomenal. So I would recommend, yeah, I see Jerry shaking your head. So I think we need to check it out. And then also there was a volunteer certificate award that went to Connie Redmond. And I know she doesn't really like to be recognized for all that work she does, but she is the superhero of volunteers. And so she was acknowledged at the Main Street Conference. So anyway, just some good things going on out there. And that's all I'll report on tonight.
Great, thank you, Melanie. All right, are there any questions for Melanie before we move on to the next part? No? All right. We are at the public hearing part of this, so I will now close the city council and open up the public hearing. And I will read from this script. I will now close the city council meeting and open the public hearing on the ordinance 2022-01, an ordinance amending chapters 8 housing of the city's comprehensive plan entitled 16, development of the Estacada Municipal Code. So I will hand that off to, who am I handing it off to here?
Maybe the
I
city.
believe that's gonna go to Alan, yes.
Okay.
Let
Now,
me share my screen here. All right. Well, good evening, counselors and members of the public. This is the second public hearing for ordinance 2022-010, which proposes amendments to Estacada's development code and comprehensive plan based on findings and recommendations from the Housing Needs Analysis and Strategies Project. What we're presenting tonight is the Planning Commission's recommendations for adopting these amendments. And the City Council is scheduled to adopt these amendments tonight, including any changes that we'll capture during the discussion. So just a little bit about the project funding. The majority of this project is funded by a $51,000 grant from the Department of Land Conservation and Development for cities to update their housing needs analyses and adopt plans for how they're going to meet future housing needs. And the city will receive those grant funds after adopting the updated HNA findings and any associated legislative amendments. All right, so this ordinance accomplishes both of those things. First, it adopts the findings of this most recent HNA, the Housing Needs Analysis, by updating the existing conditions section of our comprehensive plans housing chapter. This is not a legislative section of the comp plan and doesn't establish any policies or rules, but it does provide context and data that the legislative policies might refer to. Ideally, this section of the comp plan should get updated every 5 years or so, but currently ours still has information from 1980. So even though we know that the population estimate and projection from PSU are on the low side, it's still better to update this information as much as we can while we're adopting the alternative projection and some language recognizing that at the same time of adoption, these numbers are already outdated and undercounting. And at the rate we're growing, this is going to happen no matter what. So even if we started over with a new population estimate and projection and new buildable lands inventory, by the time we'd be ready to adopt the findings, the data would already be outdated and undercounting. As best we can, we've tried to be clear about that in the existing language, in the existing conditions language. And if council wants to add or change any of that language, please let us know during our discussion. All right, so that first part of the ordinance is just adopting the HNA findings, but the second part deals with the legislative amendments themselves. And these include updates to both the higher level, more general comp plan policies, as well as the development code, which gets much more specific about what uses are allowed and what development standards are required. And as you're surely aware by now, the development code is basically how the city's comp plan policies get implemented. So planning staff and the city manager have had several conversations with counselors leading up to this hearing, and we really appreciate you all taking the time to talk with us about those amendments. And it sounds like there are just a few remaining concerns around what the proposed code amendments might change. So after the consultant's presentation, we're going to summarize the concerns we heard from some of you recently, and then ask each of you what concerns you agree with and any other concerns you might add to that list. Once we've got all your comments captured and your questions answered, we'll turn it over for public comment. And then after public comment, we'll have a discussion to figure out what changes you want to make in order to agree on adopting this ordinance. And what we'll do at that part of the meeting is share a worksheet on the screen where you can see each of the council's concerns listed out. You'll see which councilors agree with each concern. And then we can use that worksheet to identify any changes that will need to be included in a motion to adopt the ordinance. So we want to make sure that you're familiar with what's in the packet, especially the Planning Commission's report and the two ordinance attachments, which are the comp plan amendments and the development code or Title 16 amendments. The three items here in bold are the actual adoption documents, including the ordinance itself, which adopts by reference the comp plan amendments, and the development code amendments, which are its two attachments. And then the next 4 items are the supporting documents that came out of the project, including the Housing Strategies Report, it's the HSR. Its appendix showing some informational maps, last year's housing needs report, or HNA, housing needs analysis, and the buildable lands inventory that was conducted as part of the HNA.
Sorry to interrupt. This is my fault. I sent an outdated slide for that last one. There are also 4 other exhibits that got added that were testimony that the city received. And that's 3 letters of support, one of them from Todos Juntos, one from Greenlight Development, and one from Milotron. Those are exhibits 8, 9, and 10. And then there's a letter of opposition from John Kirkpatrick, which is exhibit 11. And then there's a memo, I believe it's exhibit 12 is the questions from one of the planning commissioners, and then exhibit 13 would be the memo responding to those questions. Sorry for not adding those to the slide.
That's all right. Thanks, Taylor. Okay, so I'll just briefly address the approval criteria that apply to the plan and code amendments. But the staff report beginning on page 21 of your packet gives a much more detailed overview of how this ordinance satisfies the approval criteria that need to be met in order to approve the amendments. Staff did summarize these criteria in more detail for the Planning Commission on August 25th. So I won't go into much more detail here on how those approval criteria are met, but just to summarize, the state of Oregon requires all cities to adopt a comprehensive plan that complies with 19 statewide planning goals. And these approval criteria from the state are addressed in part 3 of the staff report. And conveniently, they align pretty closely with the chapters of our comprehensive plan, which establish the city's policy approval criteria, which are reviewed in part 4 of the report. For the reasons we described in those sections of the report, we found this proposal to be consistent with each of the goals or policies that are relevant, and also described how many of them were not applicable. And there are also regulations in our development code that we made sure were followed, and that is also described in part 5 of the staff report. All right. So we're now going to hand it over to the project consultants, Matt Hasty and Kate Rogers, to describe what's included in these comp plan and code amendments in more detail. And then, as I mentioned, we'll turn it back over to staff to summarize the concerns we've heard most recently from counselors about the current proposal. We'll gather any additional concerns that aren't already on our list. We'll get a preliminary head count for which counselors agree with each of those concerns, which, by the way, will not be an official vote. It will just help us to identify the best path forward. And at that time, we'll also take any questions from council for hearing public testimony. Then we'll bring it back for the council's discussion on options for adoption. So with that, I'll hand it over to our consultants.
All right, thanks, Alan.
To clarify, when we bring it back for the discussion on options for adoption, we're intending for there to be the formal vote at that point in time. Sorry, just wanted to clarify that. Thanks.
So we're voting at the time they come back. Say that again. I didn't catch that, Taylor. Is she still there?
So we're going to have the consultant presentation. Then we're going to hear. Then we're going to go through the list of each of the counselors' concerns, find out who agrees with what, make sure that our list is complete. Get your questions answered. Then we'll go to public testimony. Then when we bring it back for discussion, that's when we will problem solve our way if needed to an adoptable motion. That's the intention.
Okay.
Thanks.
All right, thanks, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Awesome, okay. If you go to the next slide, Alan. So Kate and I are going to give you a presentation. We'll try to get through it fairly expeditiously. We're going to kind of tag team the presentation. I'll give you kind of an overview of the process, build a little bit on what Alan said, talk about a few key findings from the housing needs analysis, as well as the buildable lands inventory process. Also build a little bit on some of what Alan said, particularly around the population projection work. And then talk about the proposed amendments to your comprehensive plan housing policies. And then Kate will cover the development code amendments, and then we'll go from there. We'll stop talking for a while, other than to answer questions to the extent you have them in the next piece. So next one. So this is just kind of an overview of the process we went through. And so the first two things that we did kind of concurrently, one was to project future housing needs. I'll talk about that a little bit more. The total amount of housing needed over the next 20 years, but also kind of the mix or the distribution of different types of housing needs. And we also concurrently looked at your supply of land within the urban growth boundary to assess the capacity for housing in the boundary, compared the supply and the demand, identified relative surplus or deficit. We did all of that in a fairly, I won't say compressed period of time, but probably the first third of the project was spent doing that. And we really spent kind of the bulk of the process on that next piece, the housing strategies and policy work. The first pieces are pretty technical in nature. The requirements are fairly prescriptive, but the housing strategy work is where you really kind of dig into, okay, how do you address these needs? So that's where we spent the bulk of the time on this. So next one, please. And then go straight to the next one. Zooming through. So demographic trends and population projections. Estacada, like other cities in Oregon, is required to use population projections that are put out by the Portland State University Population Research Center. Those are updated every 4 years. So we use the growth rates that were established by PSU at that time. They had forecasted an annual growth rate of about 1.5%. Pretty stable household size, 2.5 people per household, and a pretty stable vacancy rate of 5%. 5% sort of a typical vacancy rate that reflects just there's always a certain amount of housing in the market that's vacant because it's undergoing transition. Those projections indicated a need for an additional 635 housing units over the course of the next 20 years. To accommodate a population increase of about 1,800 people. Or 1,500 people, excuse me. Next one, please. Just a couple of additional pieces of data. We looked at per capita or median income within Estacada. That analysis of housing needs is based on a combination of information about household size, household income, and age, and sort of composition of households, and folks' tendency to want or need to rent or buy housing, and what types of housing they can most afford and most need. So just in terms of income, you're kind of somewhere between the state average and the county average. Your average income is lower than the counties, but higher than the states. Sort of the good news is income growth has outpaced inflation over the last 10 years. So people's incomes have actually risen in real terms during that time. Next one, please. Some caveats about those housing need projections. And Alan mentioned this earlier. I think you might have heard about this too in your work session on the transportation plan. The 2021 estimates, we believe, do undercount future growth in Estacada. They likely underestimated both the population at that time, the base population, as well as the growth rates. You've already seen a significant amount of development approved during the last couple of years. Given all this, even though per the state rules, you're required to use those PSU growth rates, we conducted an alternative forecast, assuming a higher estimate of growth. We're not doing this because we're saying you want more growth or you're pursuing more growth. That's just what we think is likely to happen. And we wanted to look at, if you do grow faster, what's the impact on the supply of land to meet housing needs? So that's why we kind of went through that process. And even under that process, and I'll talk about this more in a moment, you continue to have an adequate supply of residential land overall to meet new growth over the next 20 years. And I'll talk about some caveats to those caveats in a moment. I would say You want to continue to look at this. I think folks earlier in the meeting already talked about this. This is not something you should wait another 6 or 8 years to examine. It's really important to kind of keep looking at this. So I would continue to revisit that. And it's really important to coordinate with PSU when they're conducting those forecasts. And you guys do that as a staff. You want to keep doing that. So on the supply side, the land capacity side, we went through a process of, next one, sorry, of looking at all the land within your urban growth boundary. We then sort of split out just the land that's zoned for residential use or a mix of residential and other uses. We then categorize that land by, is it vacant or does it have some potential for additional development based on size of parcels and the zoning that's in place. We subtract out land that's constrained by natural resources or hazards. So stream corridors, floodplains, steep slopes, things like that. We end up then with a set of or an estimate of net buildable land in the city. It doesn't mean all that land's ready to be developed. It's not all land that's within the necessarily ready to be developed now, but over the planning period, the 20-year period, it's assumed that that is your capacity for future growth. There are some things we can't use to sort of deduct land from that inventory, and a property owner current willingness to develop that land is one of those things. So I always like to point that out. Doesn't mean all that land could be developed tomorrow or even in a year or 2 years. Next one, please. These are just a couple of maps that show first on the left, kind of breaking it out by those residential areas, and then on the right, showing you what showed up as either already developed, vacant, or partially vacant. Both of those last two have the capacity for additional development on them and additional housing units. Next one. This is sort of the outcome of that comparison of demand and supply. It ultimately showed that you have a capacity for quite a few additional housing units, upwards of 5,000 units. That projected need under that base forecast was for 787 units. So that's a lot of additional supply overall. Again, I'll talk about some of the nuances there in a sec. Next one. So we, again, and then we looked at this alternative forecast. The alternative forecast we looked at in comparison to the base forecast assumed the need for about 800 more housing units, so 800 or 900. So a total need of about 1,700 units. I mentioned a moment ago that the supply side said you've got space for about 5,000 units. So you still have enough land overall, even with that higher forecast, to meet the need. But we also broke down that comparison by land zone for different types of housing. It showed you were kind of on the edge in terms of land that is zoned for and has the capacity for higher density housing, which think of those as apartments or townhomes or things like that. So even at the base forecast, you were kind of on the edge. So if you grow faster than projected, you potentially are going to run out of the supply of that type of land a little sooner. So, so overall, strong supply of land for what you're seeing the most development of and have seen the most development of, which is sort of traditional single family detached homes. And to the extent you allow for what we call middle housing, and Kate will talk about that more in detail, you've got a supply of land for that too, but it depends on what's allowed where, and also on the standards that guide development of those types of housing. So next one. So I'll talk just a little bit about the proposed updates to your comprehensive plan policies related to housing. So we looked at that chapter of your plan and looked at the policies in relation to meeting both the types of housing needs we identified in this process. I'll also say that we looked at those policies in relation to previous work that was done by the city's Committee for Housing Affordability and Diversity. So we were looking at the outcome of that work. That work really informed a lot of what we did in this project. And in terms of just sort of meeting overall housing needs in Estacada, but also kind of regional and statewide needs. So we identified a number of recommended updates to the policies to strengthen some of those policies, to provide for a range of housing needs that were identified in that housing needs analysis, to affirmatively further federal fair housing goals. That's basically means you're going to do your part to ensure you're not discriminating against different types of people in Estacada who need different types of housing, supporting collaboration with the county and other folks in the region, because housing needs don't know borders. We did this, for the city of Estacada, but it's important to kind of work with your regional partners on these things. There's a policy around encouraging voluntary rezoning to higher density designations in areas with transit and other supportive services and near existing higher density housing zones. We'll talk about that more in just a moment. And so that it's not an actual rezoning. It's policy that would support that if somebody comes along in the future, but it's not a kind of a pre-approval, let's call it. It's just policy support for doing that if it meets all the other approval criteria for a zone change. And then we identified some strike through policies which reflected things that you've already done or are no longer relevant because they were put in the plan 15 or 20 years ago. And they've been accomplished or just aren't existing conditions here. So next one. Just a little bit more on that voluntary rezoning policy. Again, one of the impetuses here was that we did find a limited supply of land zoned and available for multifamily housing. We initially talked about potentially pursuing a rezoning. As we talked to you and other stakeholders, we came to the conclusion that we didn't want to just go out and rezone somebody's land, that should be initiated by the property owner. But that there were some areas where that might make more sense than others. And so we identified some policy language around that issue, which would say, hey, if somebody comes in for a rezoning to a higher density area for land within a certain distance of existing higher density land, or it has proximity to transit, shopping, downtown services, libraries, et cetera, you would already say, well, in that sense, it meets the city's goal. But again, would still have to go through a zone change approval process. So we're proposing to add that policy language, and then the map of those areas would be available online to anybody that wants to see that map. And as things change, that map would need to be updated over time, as additional areas are rezoned or as transit service changes or things like that. So that's just kind of a note. That's what part of the reason we didn't want to establish that as an actual sort of overlay zone within your zoning ordinance or your zoning map, because those conditions will change over time. Next one. And this is a map a couple of maps that kind of show generally where these areas are. One of the things we talked about with you earlier in the process was whether within the policy language, schools should be included, proximity to schools. And I think the earlier discussion, you directed us to take that out. Our question is that still what we want to do, assuming you want to adopt that policy language, leave schools out or put it back in? So that's kind of a question for y'all when we get to the discussion piece. Next one. So that's the policy language I'm talking about. I'll just go ahead and read it. Encourage voluntary rezoning of low and medium density zone properties to a higher density designation when proximate to other sites zoned for high density or to services with such as transit lines, libraries, the downtown zone. Again, one of the questions is if you support that policy, if you want to add schools back in or leave it out. And I'll just say again, this doesn't mean these properties would be rezoned now or they'd be pre-approved. It just provides a certain amount of policy support, all other things being equal and all other criteria being met. So I'm going to stop. Well, I'm going to almost stop. Before I stop, I'm just going to note that what Kate is going to talk about are a set of proposed amendments to your development code. And as Alan said, the development code is really what implements the policies in the comprehensive plan. They're kind of where the rubber hits the road. And so what I'm going to say is there's a number of objectives with these policies. One, we are building on the work from the CHAD, the Community and Housing Affordability and Diversity. We're really trying to in large part reduce or eliminate barriers to development of some of the forms of housing that were identified in the housing needs analysis. We looked at your code, we talked to various housing developers and providers about, hey, are there some things that you need to see or that make it financially feasible or infeasible to develop these different types of housing? So all of that work informed the development code amendments, and the development code amendments also generally support the various policies or do support the policies in the comprehensive plan that we're proposing or to be updated as well. Now I'll actually stop talking and I'll turn it over to Kate and she'll take you through those proposed development code amendments.
Thank you, Matt. And this is on, I assume. All right. So I'm Kate Rogers with MIG. I'm talking about these code amendments, and this is obviously the most exciting part of this project by far. So Matt kind of already touched on some of the sort of, the intent, the purpose, and the thinking behind these proposed amendments. So number one, kind of the through line is supporting development of a wider variety of housing types in more zones. So allowing for more housing options in more parts of the city. Specifically facilitating what's called missing middle housing, which kind of falls somewhere in between, single family, single detached homes and sort of larger apartment buildings. And these are things like duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, common wall dwellings or townhomes or row houses, which are attached homes on individual lots. And cottage cluster housing, which is already allowed in the code in certain zones. And it's kind of a newer form of housing where there are single detached kind of small homes kind of clustered around shared open spaces. And they often share features such as shared parking areas and things like that. So that's missing middle housing. And then kind of addressing some of those barriers that Matt referred to that make it kind of difficult to build some of these, needed types of housing. So, and make it more feasible to also build kind of smaller and more affordable and more attainable types of housing, as opposed to just your sort of traditional larger single family homes. Well, we'll also talk about increasing permitted densities in the higher density zones. So the places that already allow, apartments and multifamily development. And then also establishing minimum requirements so that those lands are used efficiently that are designated for higher densities. Reducing code barriers for accessory dwelling units, which are small homes that are built on the same lot as a single family home, and those can either be attached or detached, and provide kind of another option for rental opportunities, and also provide a way for the homeowner to add some income and potentially have family members live on the same property as them. And then also facilitating development on non-conforming lots, which are lots that don't, they were created before the current development code standards were established, and they don't meet all the current standards. And there are currently some, barriers to developing those existing lots in the code today. So now we'll get into some more of the details on these. And I'll kind of go through the proposed amendments by kind of theme or category, as opposed to running through chapter by chapter. So the first one is facilitating missing middle housing. Again, those are duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, common wall dwellings, and cottage clusters. So the first one is just to make sure all of those housing types are permitted in all of the city's residential zones. So that includes, R1, R2, R3, and then also the sort of mixed use residential and commercial zones like MMU and CMU and C2 and the NCR zone. So that's kind of the gamut of zones we're talking about. On the lower density end of those zones, so in the R1 zone, we would propose limiting the middle housing developments to just up to 4 units. So that could be up to a fourplex or a quadplex, or it could be up to 4 attached common wall dwellings in one building, or say 4 cottages in a cottage cluster. So allowing middle housing, but kind of a smaller scale version of middle housing in R1 and in the NCR zone. And then a little bit more intensity allowed potentially in the R2 zone. That's the proposal, up to 6 units. So 6 townhomes or cottage common wall dwellings attached or up to 6 cottages on a lot. And then these types of housing are already permitted in the R3 and the mixed use zones. So we wouldn't propose changing that. So they're allowed today, and we would, continue to allow those larger developments. There were some concerns raised earlier in the process about what that would mean in new subdivisions in the R1 zone. A lot of the city's land is zoned for single family homes in the R1 zone. And there were concerns that if middle housing were allowed, then, there would just be full developments of quadplexes or full developments of townhomes or cottage clusters. And while we don't think that's likely, we think there's still a very strong demand for, single family homes in Estacada. The proposal to kind of respond to that is to limit how many lots in a subdivision could be developed with a single type of middle housing. So you couldn't have in a sort of medium-sized subdivision of 5 to 10 acres, the limit would be no more than 30% of the lots developed with one type of housing. And then in larger subdivisions, no more than 20% of the lots. So that would ensure there's kind of a mix of housing types. And again, that would just apply to the middle housing. If it were a straight kind of single family subdivision, that could be 100% of the subdivision as that type of housing. And then moving on to the next slide, just to kind of make sure that these types of housing are actually feasible to build. The current standards in the zones where middle housing is allowed, the minimum lot sizes and some of the other development standards would make it really challenging for those to kind of financially pencil out for developers. Really pretty large, some of the largest minimum lot sizes I've seen looking at a lot of cities' middle housing codes. So the proposal is to reduce minimum lot sizes for those housing types. And not only would those make this housing type more kind of feasible to build, it would also promote kind of smaller scale developments, because these buildings would be constructed on smaller lots and could be kind of more to scale with single family homes. So the proposed standards are for a duplex, it would be the same size as a single family lot in each of the zones where it's permitted. And then for all the other housing types, the proposal would be 2,500 square feet per unit. So the lot size would kind of scale up based on the number of units. And then just in keeping with the current standards, which allows a little bit higher density in MMU and CMU mixed use zones, some smaller lots would be allowed for common wall dwellings. Again, just in keeping with the current code. Moving on to some of the proposed standards for multifamily housing. The recommended change is to, well, first I'll say that the current standards are based on a minimum lot area per unit requirement, which in the way it's kind of implemented in the code is a little bit confusing to kind of understand and use, and it sort of scales based on the number of dwellings, which kind of tends to disadvantage some of the smaller scale multifamily types. Like a 5-plex would have a much lower density allowance than, a larger apartment development. So the proposal is just to kind of simplify the way this is calculated and switch to just units per acre, regardless of the size of the development. And to increase the allowance to some extent, really, it wouldn't be a significant increase based on the way it's calculated today, but the proposed requirement would be a maximum of 30 units per acre in R3, NCR, and C2, which is just a little bit higher than what's currently allowed, but it would also apply even to smaller sites. And then in MMU and CMU, the current, I'm not sure exactly what the current, I can't recall exactly how it kind of calculates out. I think it may be somewhere around 30 units per acre today. And the proposal is to increase that to 50 units per acre, which really would be in keeping with what the current height allowances are in those zones. Those zones allow up to 65 feet, I believe, about 6 stories.
55 or 65, but fairly tall buildings. And that level of height really wouldn't be achievable based on the maximum densities that are in the code today. So this would just be kind of squaring the densities and height allowances that are in the code. And then in addition, establishing minimum density standards, which would ensure that the land that is designated for multifamily housing would be used efficiently and in a way that's consistent with the purpose for those zones. So again, there's really a limited supply of that multifamily housing, multifamily zoning in the city. So we want to make sure that it's not, today someone could go in and build sort of large lot, single family homes if they really wanted to. So this would just ensure that a certain level of density is built in some of the higher density zones. And this would only apply if you're subdividing land, so you're creating 4 or more new lots, or if you're building multifamily housing. So it wouldn't apply if you just have, a larger property and you want to build 1 or 2 houses on it. This wouldn't kick in that case. It also wouldn't apply in the R1 or R2 zones. And the standard would, for a minimum density that's recommended, is 50% of the maximum density that applies in the zone. So in R3, NCR, and C2, that would be 15 units per acre minimum, which is roughly equivalent to sort of a typical, I would say, sort of townhome development. And then in the higher density mixed use zones, it would be 25 units per acre, which is kind of medium density multifamily.
2 to 3 story apartments.
2 to 3 story, yeah.
Kate, I just wanted to make a correction. You were right. It is 65 foot is the maximum height for those really dense zones. The
Thank you.
CMU and MMU.
Okay, great. Okay, and then this next kind of grouping is just addressing some of the standards that we thought would be presenting barriers to developing either middle housing or multifamily housing. So again, relaxing standards that are maybe too restrictive. Reducing front setbacks. So Estacada has 20-foot setbacks in most of its residential zones today, which is pretty large. So just reducing that to 15 feet, I think would provide a little bit more space for development. And that would be also consistent with the setback requirements in the NCR zone, for example, which is one of the city's newer zoning districts. Increasing maximum building height just for multifamily development in the R3 multifamily zone and in the NCR zone. So currently the maximum height is 35 feet, which, would allow a 3-story development, but, and I think in Estacada, probably 4 stories would be pushing it in terms of, what the market would likely support in the near term, but longer term, 4 stories in a multifamily zone might be feasible. So this would just allow that to happen should the market support it. Again, this only would apply to multifamily development. And then just for common wall dwellings, increasing the permitted lot coverage. So lot coverage is, the amount of a percentage of a lot that can be covered by a building. And currently the standard is 55% kind of across the board in all of the residential zones. And when you're talking about attached dwellings, those just tend to take up more space on the lot because, they're sharing sidewalls, there's no side setbacks. So increasing that from 55 to 70% just for individual common wall lots would make those more feasible. All right, the next standard or the next kind of strategy is promoting accessory dwelling units, which, are pretty, I think, we heard in the survey that went out earlier late last year, that, these were a pretty sort of well-liked form of housing, of kind of infill housing in the city. And so trying to find ways to kind of promote accessory dwelling units or ADUs. So one of those would be to allow 2 ADUs. So currently only 1 ADU is allowed on a lot with a single family home. But this recommendation would allow 2 ADUs as long as one of those is either attached or internal to the primary dwelling. So the second one could be detached, but one of them would have to be attached. And clarifying that no parking is required for an ADU, and this is really just a state law requirement. You cannot require parking for an accessory dwelling unit. So this would just be making the code consistent with state law. Allowing some additional lot coverage up to 10% on smaller lots, just to make ADUs a little more feasible, and allowing reduced rear setbacks. So currently the minimum setback, I believe, is 15 or 20 feet, just reducing it somewhat to 10 feet on the rear property line. Again, to make it sort of a little easier to site those on a lot. Now, everyone's favorite topic, parking requirements. So Estacada has pretty high parking requirements for some of these middle housing types. So in the current code, duplexes, triplex, single family, duplexes, triplexes, and common wall dwellings all require 2 spaces per unit, which is, again, it's pretty high, especially when you think about a triplex would have to have 6 off-street parking spaces. And that at that point, we're talking about kind of a small parking lot. And then the funny thing is that 4plexes, which are currently considered multifamily in the code, in the current code, multifamily only requires 1 space per unit. So actually a 4plex only requires 4 parking spaces. So a triplex, you need to have 6, a 4plex, you need to have 4. So there's kind of a mismatch there. So the general approach is for those kind of plexes, duplex, triplex, and 4plex, allows reduced parking only on smaller lots. And we'll talk about kind of how this was changed after we talked to the Planning Commission. And then for common wall dwellings, allow reduced parking when there is on-street parking available. So the proposed standards, the initial proposal was to, for duplexes, triplexes, and 4plexes to require one space per unit plus 1 additional space on the lot. Planning Commission had some concerns about that approach, and they suggested allowing those reduced parking, but only for smaller lots. So only if the lot is under or equal to or less than 7,500 square feet. So for any lot that's over 7,500 square feet, it would be 2 spaces per unit. So consistent with the current code. So in the case of 4plexes, this proposal would actually be adding parking requirements kind of across the board. So for 4plexes on larger lots, you would still need to provide 2 spaces per unit. And then there's also a recommendation to reduce parking requirements to just 1 space per unit if the duplex, triplex, or 4plex is created by converting a single family home. So if you take an existing home, convert it, divide it internally, you wouldn't need to provide as much parking because there might not be, the space to kind of fit the parking in on the site. And then for common wall dwellings, again, keeping the requirement for two spaces per unit, but reducing it to just 1 space if there's on-street parking available that is, adjacent to the site. There's space for the car, and the road is a minimum width. And this is responding to concerns that we heard, maybe from you all, maybe from the Planning Commission, just to make sure that there's room kind of on both sides of the street for parking and for cars to pass by. And then I think the last one is facilitating development of non-conforming lots. So enabling the development of these, existing legal lots that are below the minimum lot size or dimensions in the zone, which in the current code, if a lot, say, is only 4,000 square feet in a zone, you just can't build anything on it, which is, it's kind of not the most efficient use of space. And you can also argue that there could be takings claims under the Constitution because there would be no economic use for that property. And, this is space that could be used for housing. So the suggestion would just be to allow undersized lots to be developed with a single family home or a duplex or a common wall dwelling, just because common wall dwellings require less space per unit. a development would still need to meet all the other standards for parking, setbacks, infrastructure, utility connections and things like that. So it would just be allowing those sites to be developed. And then this last one, I'm not sure how we want to address this one. This was the proposal that kind of came as part of a public comment from a housing developer that is interested in pursuing an affordable housing development on Main Street. And they wanted to, have affordable housing, including on the ground floor. And as you all know, residential uses are not permitted on the ground floor on Main Street or on Broadway. It has to be on the second floor above, and the ground floor needs to be a commercial use. So after talking to the Planning Commission about it, they recommended adding an exception that would just apply to Main Street, and that would only apply if the proposed residential use would replace an existing residential use. And I don't know if Taylor wants to step in and talk about this, but there was kind of a code interpretation for the current use of the site that they're looking at that may make this recommendation maybe not make as much sense as we thought it did.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. So we reached out to, we're talking about the McRae Motel, which is currently functioning as a long-term residence. But legally, it, according to our code, would be considered a commercial use as it is a motel. And we were wondering if the fact that it's functioning as a long-term residence would allow it to be considered an existing residential use. We reached out to the city attorney for direction on that question. And after talking with him, we also looked through some old court papers that basically answered our question, which is no, it would not be considered an existing residential use. So there's really only one. I think it would be 300 Main. Is that right? Is the only place on Main Street that would be an existing ground floor residential use. So the council could, if they want, add this exception for Main Street, allowing ground floor residential uses to front Main Street. But in order for that particular property to be redeveloped with ground floor residential, the code would need to just allow ground floor residential outright and not require it to replace an existing residential use.
And it would need to be an outright, not a conditional.
That's right. And I'm going to punt it back to Kate here to maybe explain why we would not recommend including it as a conditional use.
Yeah, so the problem with requiring conditional use for a residential development is that it is not consistent with the state's requirements for clear and objective standards and conditions and procedures for housing development. So it's ORS 1973074, if you're interested in looking it up later, but it's, you want me to say that again? ORS 1973074. And it's something that's been kind of in the statute for a while, but it was amended within the last 3 or 4 years, I think, it formerly talked about just needed housing. And then the language was changed to say all housing included needed housing needed to have a clear and objective path to approval. So if you allow a housing type in a zone, there needs to be a way for the city to review that development without using any discretion. So there needs to be at least a path for that to happen. So if you require conditional use approval for a housing type in a zone, that's, conditional use is a discretionary review process, as you all know. So, so that would not be consistent with that requirement. So this is something that I think a lot of, communities in Oregon are kind of grappling with right now. And it's a really difficult statute to be compliant with. But that is the way it is. So really, I mean, we kind of looked at this to a small extent as part of this process. for accessory dwelling units, we ended up proposing some amendments to those design standards that were discretionary, but we didn't do a full kind of audit of parts of the code that were not consistent with that clear and objective requirement. So, but you're sort of opening yourself up to potential legal challenge if a developer decides they want to get a little litigious. So.
We don't want to recommend adding something that might get you in hot
Right.
water. And that's what this would
Exactly,
potentially
because
do.
if you end up, if you deny a proposal on the basis of, discretionary criteria, they could come back and say, well, you can't apply those criteria to my development, therefore you must approve it. So that can happen and has happened in other places.
Can you amend the code after a project's completed?
You can't retroactively, no. Yeah.
I mean, if you changed to allow it, could you then take that away after construction? After a project was built and you didn't want further projects built in that
Oh.
area, could you amend the code to remove that allowance?
Sure, yeah. So it wouldn't affect the thing that was just built, but it could affect any future development, yeah.
It would make it a non-conforming use. And then you would have issues about the ability to expand or change it moving forward. But that would be, yes, the short answer is yes, but you want to think about the kind of the ramifications of it.
So is that all we have on this?
That is all Kate and I have to present. And thank you for your patience. I know it was a lot of information, a lot of time.
We thank you for your
Yeah,
time.
so we're done talking except to answer questions. And I think Alan and Taylor are gonna facilitate the next piece, yeah.
Yeah, Alan, did you want to share the spreadsheet or you want me to go ahead and share it?
Yeah, I can do it.
Okay. So we're gonna bring up, we are gonna gather your questions, don't worry. First, we're gonna bring up the list of concerns that we have heard over the past week from some of you. Thank you once again for spending your time and thought on that. And when we get it up on the screen here.
Yeah, one sec. There it is. Okay. Sorry.
What we have done, and I don't know if you might need to zoom in, or I'll read these anyway. So what we have done is we've labeled each concern with the initials of the counselor who, brought up the concern to us. And we're just going to walk down this list, and I'll ask that the consultants please feel free to chime in and help out with any misconceptions that might be present there, or just clarifications that it seems like it might be helpful to make. And then we're going to find out whether there are any concerns that we need to add to this list that aren't shown up here. And then lastly, we're going to go around and find out which concerns each of you agrees with. So I'm just going to go ahead and start. The first concern Mayor Drinkwine brought up, and this concern is with the proposed off-street parking for Plexes. Currently only requires one space per unit with the additional, you scroll back up, Alan?
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
One space per unit with the additional space. So it'd be 3 spaces for a duplex, 4 spaces for a triplex, 5 spaces for a quadplex. And we wanted to question / clarification. How do you feel about the Planning Commission's recommendation to actually keep it at 2 spaces per unit, just if the lot is larger than 7,500 square feet? The second comment here is concerned, or rather suggesting that density should be focused off of Highway 220. I think this is supposed to be 224 and Eagle Creek Road, where the infrastructure can better accommodate the higher traffic. And then the third concern from Mayor Drinkwine, can you scroll back up again?
So sorry.
The third concern is about reducing lot sizes. Worried about people building houses right next to each other, not having any lawns. And so he would propose keeping lot size requirements the same or increasing them. And a question or a clarification that I just wanted to add here is that the ordinance would not be reducing any lot sizes for single family homes. It would only be for those middle housing types, which are still, because of the market, less likely to be developed. So considering that our current lot sizes really make that middle housing development kind of difficult and infeasible, are the counselors okay with only reducing lot sizes for those middle housing types? We heard from Councilor Litke, who shared concerns about exempting internal conversions of single family homes to middle housing types, exempting those from minimum lot size requirements. So part of the proposal would be if there's a single family home on a 7,500 square foot lot, and they wanted to convert it into a triplex. Kate, please correct me if I'm wrong. I think the current proposal would allow them to do that. Well, actually, I used a bad starting lot size. Let's say a single family home on a 5,000 square foot lot in the R2 zone, which is the current standard for single family homes. If they wanted to convert into a triplex, they would be allowed to, even though what we're proposing for triplexes would be 2,500 square feet per unit. So normally a triplex would need to be on a 7,500 square foot lot. I think I said that correctly. I've got
said that correctly, yes.
COVID brain fog. So, and then the second comment from Joel, his concern about, sounded like maybe sort of a general concern about common walls. We talked about how they in other cities are not always the most pretty thing to look at, and especially when you've got more than six, a bunch of them in a row. So he was talking about wanting to prohibit having more than 6 common wall units in a row. And then we also chatted with Councilor McElroy, who expressed disagreeing with allowing triplexes and quadplexes in the low density and medium density zones. And so we want to ask all of you, would you be satisfied with kind of a compromise? So allowing just triplexes in the R1 zone, but not allowing quadplexes in the R1 and R2 zones. And this is, this was included in the proposal because throughout the project, here with the meetings with the project advisory committee, meetings with the planning commission and the city council, what we heard was generally broad support, especially for allowing triplexes in those zones. And then there was kind of a more mixed support for the quadplexes. We did hear a few with concerns about allowing quadplexes in the lowest density zone. So we're going to want to ask, how do you all feel about keeping the triplexes in there, but removing the quadplexes? And I will also note that the quadplexes are currently listed as a conditional use in the R2 zone, which we just talked about how that's, maybe legally we'll want to look at changing that in the future, but for the purpose of these amendments, we would, I guess, just leave it as a conditional use. And then lastly, Councilor McElroy also expressed concern about allowing the redevelopment or conversion of single family homes to triplexes or quadplexes in the existing single family neighborhoods, worrying that existing neighbors might not be happy about living next to middle housing suddenly. So those are the concerns that we have listed. And I want to ask what else we need to capture on this list? What did we miss from our conversations? And if we did, I apologize. Or what has maybe come up since we talked with y'all?
Did we not talk to the other counselors, or is there just no questions from the other counselors that were involved
We
in the
invited,
survey?
yeah, we invited everybody, and some either, I think everybody else indicated that they didn't have concerns if we didn't talk with them. I see Paul's raising their hands, or your hand. Sorry, Paul.
Yeah, I just want to chime in. I do not have any further concerns. I've sat in with the planning commission and have reviewed this with them quite extensively so far. So I think they've come to a good compromise and a good understanding on what's being proposed, and look forward to discussing the concerns that are listed here now.
Okay. All right. So where are we at with this now?
I have a.
So now we're asking what else needs to be added to this list? Are there any concerns among you all that are not captured on this list up here?
Yes,
Sure.
yes, and I did reach back out to Taylor. A lot of times when I read through these, sometimes it's helpful to just have a discussion, and one thing that cropped up that I didn't really see when I was reading, because it's just a big document and I'm more of a like visual talk it out kind of person. One thing that jumped out at me this evening, I'm not a fan of the 50 units per acre. That I would like to stick to the aesthetic that Estacada, continue to have that small town feel. And if we start building up and up and up, having, 4-story and so forth, we're going to start looking like Happy Valley. And, if you build it, they will come. So not that I'm trying to discourage people from moving out here. However, I want to stick to the aesthetic that we currently have here, and try to keep it, have a safe, small town feel to it. So that was one thing that jumped out to me this evening as a concern. The other concern of mine is the 2 ADUs on a property. I'm actually okay with the parking changes. I will say that I'm okay with the parking changes.
Okay.
Okay, great. Thank you.
One more question from Joel.
So a couple things. I get what Councilor Hughes was speaking about. I did some quick math earlier, and so there's 43,560 square feet in an acre. You break that down by what we had said, and everything else is 2,500 square foot per unit. When we look at like triplexes and so on, that would bring it down to 17.5 units per acre, roughly. Considering there might be a slightly higher density, 30 was too high for what I was even looking at. 20 to 25 makes more sense to me to try to keep that small town feel that we're looking at. So I definitely agree on that, just based upon numbers alone. Besides the fact is that people have expressed over and over and over again, we're a small town, does not take it outside of that. Other things, I have some serious concerns with the parking. When it comes down to stuff like, along what your, Councilor Hughes had said with the ADUs, if there's no requirements to add additional off-street parking, then that starts adding a lot more vehicles on the street. And we have a lot of questions even around our TSP, the traffic safety plan, that aren't even, we're still in the middle of. So there's a lot of questions we can't even answer for ourselves when it comes down to traffic. I've asked questions earlier today about what some of our requirements are by law to change. And so I'm hoping to get some answers from some of that. I think they were sent to you. So
Yes,
I'll be looking for.
We are going to bring up a slide with those answers after
Excellent.
we gather these comments. Yeah, thanks.
I'm going to bring, I brought this last one up from the very beginning, and I'm going to keep saying it. The numbers thing, absolutely ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. I feel like we paid for a Ferrari. We're getting a 1980s Corvette.
What are you referring to?
The numbers that we use from TSU, it's absolutely ridiculous. Those are broken from the beginning. To calculate all of our stuff out there is absolutely ridiculous. I think it's a horrible practice. It's absolutely horrible. If we had new numbers that just came out, those numbers should be recalculated, and we should have new numbers being entered in before we pass something to go in our ordinances. sit down, recalculate the new numbers that came out. But to say that we're going to be, was it 5,800 here in the next 5 years? We're going to hit that by the end of next year. We have 1,700 housing units permitted right now. You add 3.5 people per that, that's going to bump us to 8,000 at least within the next 3 to 5 years, assuming they will get built. Going 80% of that, we'll still be back at 7,000 or 8,000. It's absolutely ludicrous to use those numbers, then we know they're broken from the beginning. And so I say before we can do anything, we need to get new numbers so we can have good data to go on, not broken data from the beginning. Despite what may be common practice or something, we need to know what we're working with now. If it comes out every 4 years, 4 years is, we just had new ones come out, we can figure out the numbers. I think we're good on that. So. Okay. That's all I got there.
Okay. Anybody else? All right, continue. I don't think we have any other
I had a
questions.
quick question.
Oh, right.
Katie, you had mentioned that with the on-street parking, that it allows for traffic to go by. Is that allows for a single car to go by? So if you have cars on both sides of the street and you have a car coming down that, are you accounting for cars being able to go at the same time, or you have to stop, wait for a car to come through? And then go
Right.
through?
It would have to allow parking on both sides and two-way travel.
What
Yeah,
width
'cause
is
the-
that road that you're assuming?
36 feet.
36 feet?
Yeah, so that's 8 feet per parked car and 10 feet per cars in both directions.
And does
So
that include the bulb outs that are already used in the
The
street?
bulb
structure?
outs, basically you can't park in the bulb out areas, so.
That's right, you can't, but you can't pass on them either, so.
Yeah.
Because
but-
they stick out too far.
Sure,
Along with traffic going both directions.
but you
and
wouldn't be able
there.
to park there. So I mean, we're just talking about kind of where could you park a car?
Yeah.
Yeah. Where could you have space to park a car? And you'd have to have space, and if there's bulb out, you know, space. So it does kind of take that into account as well.
Based upon what Councilor McElroy has mentioned about the street width, we have trucks. We have a lot of trucks in this area, lots of trucks. And I don't know about you, but you get 4 trucks, say you get one parked on each side of the road and you get 2 passing, 36 feet is not going to work. My truck alone by itself is a little over 10 feet wide. And then you add mirrors. That's pretty big, and that's pretty common in these areas. I've driven down to 36-foot wide streets. Doesn't work. That's a 1-car passing. So we would have to reevaluate the width of the streets along with that, which is discussed and mentioned during the previous workshop about the concerns of the width of the street to have to be wider so that we can make sure that we can actually have legitimate vehicles that are out here in our area properly be able to pass, which again comes back around to the need for an updated TSP before we can make decisions on that. So.
I see
can't see
2
the
hands
hands.
up.
Are there any hands up?
Melanie and Paul both have hands up.
Melanie and Paul?
Hi there. Yeah, I had a question. First of all, you referenced the setbacks. Previously, I thought we said setbacks in the front moving to 15 feet. I thought it would also addressed on the driveway section, it would have to be 20-foot setback. Did I misunderstand that, or is that accounted for?
Yeah, that's right, Melanie. I didn't mention it in my presentation, but yeah, the current, right, the 20-foot setback would still apply to the garage. So the 15% or 15-foot setback would just apply to sort of the dwelling part of the home.
So that you'd have to have enough space to park a car in your driveway, basically.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, okay. And I do, I appreciate the concern about we need the TSP, we need the H&A, which comes first. How do we do that? How do we make sure we have accurate numbers? And in this process that we're doing, I think it's, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like it's an update process. We don't really know how it's going to go. I think in the current comp plan, it said we were going to be at 8,000 people by 2000. If I remember reading that right.
10,000 by year 2000. Yeah.
Yeah. So we make our best guess. And right now it seems like we're going to outgrow our urban growth boundary in the next 20 years. But we don't really know that. So I think that to go ahead and update these now, knowing that we're going to have to do some I don't know, can we do like minor updates to them and do like amendments to these things along the way? Or so like every maybe 4 or 5 years, we do a smaller update. And then, in 10 or 12 years, do a full update if needed? Or do we have to go through the whole process every time? How does that work?
Yeah, that's a great question. The policy part of what the policy amendments do is remove some of the language that was very specific to that 1979 housing needs analysis and just refer generally to whatever is the most updated housing needs analysis. So what that means is that in the next 5 years or 2 years, whenever the council decides they want to update those numbers again, adopt updated numbers again. I mean, we can always look at what the PSU population estimate is, but when we want to update our comp plan with, another set of those numbers, we could just update the existing conditions section with a new housing needs analysis finding. So we would go back and look at an updated population projection, look at an updated buildable lands inventory, and only update that existing conditions section without doing this whole housing strategy project on top of it. Usually when you update your HNA, you also, you're doing a comp plan amendment anyway. You're probably going to go in and revisit those policies. But you wouldn't have to, right? You could just update the findings of the HNA. So that's a great question.
Okay, Paul, you had your hand up?
No, that was just up from earlier, sorry.
Oh, okay.
So it was mentioned that the new numbers come out from PSU every 4 years. Why don't we make it a practice to update the numbers every 4 years when they come out, considering that's also when the census is and everything? We can get good numbers for our city. We can calculate that accordingly. So why don't we look at every 4 years, updating our numbers from PSU, but definitely using current numbers that just came out. So this idea.
That, if I could speak, that's a great suggestion. And the last time they were doing the housing or the population forecasting, former city manager Denise Carey and I did not participate in that. We aren't planners. And I think Clackamas County probably participated, and that's where we were getting our planners from, but we didn't understand really what the process was. And how important it would be, because we hadn't experienced this exponential growth that we are right now. But now I feel like we're in a much better position because we have we have 3 planners on staff right now, and they have so that hopefully will, I know they're kind of overloaded right now, but will give us the capacity and the knowledge base and the skills. That's what they understand. And so they'll be able to participate better. And I think we will be able to keep up with this, unlike what has happened in the past. So I think that's an excellent idea to just stay up with it as the numbers get renewed.
Okay. Taylor?
Okay, so I just want to make sure, are there any other concerns that we want to add to this list here?
I think Charity, you had your hand up.
Oh, no, it wasn't in the concerns part. I just was gonna jump in on what Melanie was saying as far as revisiting. I think a good time frame would be every 3 years, because you still have some members of a previous council on for another year, and then you've got new council members coming in, and same with, maybe some commissions and so on. You've kind of got some old guard and new guard, some fresh eyes, some older eyes, and then you have like that mixed perspective. And so that's why I think this would be something to revisit every 3 years, just to stay on top of things, just with the speed of growth around here. So. Anyway.
Taylor, go ahead.
All righty. So if there aren't any more concerns to add to this list, I'm going to go through and ask for everyone's agreement. Maybe you feel neutral or disagree with these concerns here. And I'm going to ask those of you in the room, Alan, you could type this right into the spreadsheet, I think.
Sure.
What we'll do is if you agree, give a thumbs up. If you feel neutral, thumb to the side. If you disagree, thumb down. And Alan will type the appropriate letter into the spreadsheet here, and we're going to come back to this after public comment. This will help us identify what changes need to be made. So the first concern is the proposed off-street parking for plexes on lots. So 3 off-street parking for a duplex, 4 for a triplex, 5 for a quadplex. If you agree, to dislike, because it's kind of complicated, if you also dislike the current proposed off-street parking, can you give a thumbs up? You agree with this concern?
I make mine simple. I agree with everything up and down that list. So you can just put me, I agree on everything there.
Okay,
So.
that is simple. Thank you. And then Jerry and Paul.
Is it a green or
I-
off street? Oh, sorry.
I agree with the concern, the first one there, but I like the planning commission's recommendation though.
Okay, that's my
How are we
next.
doing that one?
That's my next question. How do you all? Oh, so I'll
I'm still, I agree with that also. I agree with both. Yes.
Okay, and so how does the rest of the council feel about the planning commission's recommendation to require 2 spaces per unit if the lot is larger than 7,500 square feet? Does that satisfy the original concern for plexes, if we include that change?
Kind of neutral. I'd have to see what that would look like.
Am I reading that correctly? If so, for a quad would always need to be 10,000 square feet, right? So a quadplex would always have 2 spaces per unit.
Yeah,
Two spaces per unit.
So then you would have 8 parking.
For a
8 parking
quadplex.
spaces for a quadplex, unless it was in like a planned unit development type situation where there's maybe more flexibility to allow smaller lots that are not just kind of the standard minimum lot size.
so I'll call on, I don't know if the spreadsheet is updating in real time. Counselor McElroy, how do you feel about allowing 1 space per unit for plexes on, plus that additional, so 3 for duplex, 4 for triplex, 5 for quadplex, on those smaller lots, but then if it's larger than 7,500 square feet, requiring 2 spaces?
This being line 3 on the spreadsheet,
Yes, line
Yes.
3 and 4.
agree.
Okay. And then who are we missing here? Mayor Drinkwine. Obviously, you agree with your own comment. And Mayor Drinkwine, how do you feel about the Planning Commission's proposal to change that?
Well, I'm not real comfortable with the parking issue. I know the parking is going to be a problem a lot more than just there. I mean, there's quite a bunch of areas here where that's going to fall into play. So I'm gonna agree. I guess I'll agree with. No, I'm not agreeing with the Planning Commission's recommendation. I
Okay,
think there should be more parking.
okay. And just to clarify, Counselor McElroy, you felt good about the Planning Commission's recommendation?
No, I disagree with it. Hey, what information are you guys using for calculating the average cars per household, per housing unit? What's the average number of cars per housing unit
That people own.
that would be parked? Yeah. If you
Well,
have a
so this
fourplex,
is really about what you're gonna require at a minimum. And so if what the planning commission recommended was And the reasoning behind it was that for smaller lots, it makes it very, very difficult to develop a triplex or a quadplex if you're requiring 2 spaces per unit, 6 or, 6 or 8 spaces. It just makes it infeasible. So you just won't see those things developed. If it's a larger lot, you've got more space, require 2 spaces per unit. That's what you would require at a minimum. And these are all about what you require as a minimum, not necessarily what somebody might actually provide. They can always provide more than the minimum. This is what you'd require at a minimum. So the when we talked to the planning commission about this in terms of the impact on sort of the feasibility of developing smaller lots, they said, well, okay, that makes sense. How about, yes, we'd support something, a lesser number on the smaller lots, but if it's more than 2,500 square or more than 7,500 square feet, require 2 spaces per unit. So that's kind of where the.
Did they come up with any kind of numbers for the amount of cars that would be left on the street that aren't accommodated by the parking spaces? That's kind of what I'm asking.
Oh, I see. No, we did not identify a specific number in that regard. We don't know. And I don't, yeah, it's pretty hard to know, especially moving forward. It's hard to know. We might know now. Actually, we don't know how many people own how many cars. And this is not a data point that we have.
There's
It's a good question.
There's probably research on a more general level, not specifically in Estacada, maybe not even in Oregon, but there might be kind of general car ownership based on sort of unit type and unit size. There might be information.
I just
Along
curious,
those
there's
lines?
2.5 people per household. As they figured that out, I'm just curious if they figured out how many cars are registered per household. No.
No. Yeah, and if the average is 2.5 people per household, usually one of those is a kid. Often they're, younger than driving age. So, but again, how many per household, I can tell you what you have now.
You could also just look at, we should set minimums of single household 2 parking spaces, double duplex 3 parking spaces, triplex 4 parking spaces, and then as you go to a quadplex, it's going to put it at 6 because it'll accommodate. It's almost basically 1.5 vehicle spaces rounded up is what it would go to. And so that's kind of what you would be looking at an average. And that's something we can consider is either 1.5 rounded up, or we can go to just those set numbers. That might be one idea to go to, and it solves the problem, I think.
Councillor Tenbush has his hand raised.
Okay. Counselor.
So I guess this question is for Melanie and Taylor. So right now, currently, we have a minimum of 2 off-street spaces per single family home. Is that correct?
Correct.
So then what the planning commission is recommending is to acquire 2 off-street spaces per unit, which is the same as our single family home. So, I cannot disagree with that logic, with that thinking.
I just wrote in the suggestion that Councillor Litke just made, which would be 1.5 spaces per unit rounded up. And that is a little different from what we're showing currently, which is 3 for a duplex, 4 for a triplex. For a quadplex, it would be 6 instead of 5. And so I'd like to go around one more time and find out if that feels better to some of you folks who said no to the previous one. Councillor McElroy
I'd agree with that.
and Councillor Hughes
Yeah, that sounds better to me.
and Mayor Drink.
That sounds better, yeah.
And obviously Councillor Litke just had that idea. And Councillor Tenbush.
Well, that's basically 2 spaces per unit. So again, I can't disagree.
Oops. And yeah, wrong answer. Councillor Strobel.
And I'm fine too, but just for clarification, this would actually increase the this is higher than what we're currently requiring now, especially for quadplexes. Is that right?
It's definitely higher than what we're requiring now for quadplexes. It's lower than what we're requiring right now for duplexes and triplexes. It's kind of in the middle of what the current draft of the proposal would be in the middle of that and 2 units. So it's striking a compromise.
Gotcha. To keep it moving forward, yeah, I will agree.
Okay, the next question here is, do you agree that density should be focused off of the highway and Eagle Creek Road? And the reasoning behind that is where infrastructure can better accommodate the higher traffic. Councillor McElroy, do you share that concern or that inclination?
And that's speaking to like the North City residential zoning.
Yeah, that would be North City residential, the mill area mixed use, the central mixed use zoning, which do currently provide for those denser.
So can we, before we go around, can we clarify what is being asked for here again? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I guess I don't know what change this would make to the proposal. Maybe
I think it would coincide with the R1 and R2 being removed from the higher density. Speaks to the same thing.
Maybe, so Mayor Drinkwine, I don't know if you wanted to, if we captured this correctly, or maybe I shouldn't have included it on the list.
You don't even have to put it on the list, just move it along. It was a general statement. I just feel that you have to look out for the traffic getting in and out. We had a conversation about most of the developments have one way in and one way out. If we ever experience another catastrophe like we just went through, getting in and out of those complexes is pretty difficult. So focusing our areas that should have those kind of heavy density areas should be closer to a road that can accommodate the traffic to get them in and out. So that was my concern.
And Mayor.
Yeah.
And it also kind of coincides with what we're talking about as far as development in that area. You know, there's going to be, it's mixed use, there's going to be apartments, things like that. So it would coincide with that. So I would agree.
Is that better clarity for you, Taylor?
Yeah, thank you.
Mhm.
So the next one here is a concern about reducing lot sizes. So this proposal would be keep the lot size requirements the same or increase them. And so I want to clarify. I'm hearing an echo. I want to clarify. I think. Yeah. Okay. I want to clarify that this would only, so the proposal would only reduce lot sizes for those middle housing types, not for any single family development. And so I want to find out if councilors agree with the proposed lot size reductions just for middle housing types, or if you're wanting to see changes to those. And we can go, I'll go around in the other direction this time. Councilor Strobel.
I am fine with the proposal, so I guess I would disagree with this concern. I think from my standpoint, it would be up to folks what they would want to buy or purchase. If a lot size is smaller due to some of the setback changes that we've put in, and they don't want to live there, that's their choice whether they want to buy that or not. So I think we'd let the market decide, but I think doing this allows for more flexibility in allowing that middle market to come in.
Okay, sounds good. And I apologize for the confusing double negatives here. I'm getting your answer to the question. Do you agree with just reducing lot sizes for middle housing? So I'm putting you down as agree for that. Councilor Tenbush.
I also agree with the proposal, reducing lot sizes for middle housing types, and disagree with the concern.
Okay. Councilor Litke.
I disagree. I disagree. I have concerns around the way that this was proposed.
Mayor Drinkwine,
I disagree.
Counselor Hughes,
I will agree since this is going to keep the lot size the same for the single family homes.
and Counselor McElroy.
I disagree with it.
Okay, and we can come back and talk about what changes you would like to see for this. The next comment is disagree with exempting internal conversions from the minimum lot size requirement. So I want to know who shares that concern. Counselor McElroy.
I agree with it.
Whoops. Oh geez, I just. And Counselor Hughes.
I'm sorry, could you clarify this one again for me?
Yeah, so currently the proposal would exempt internal conversions from the minimum lot size requirement. So if you had a single family home, you could change it to a duplex or a triplex, but the lot was too small for the minimum lot size for, let's say a triplex. Since it's an existing single family home, you would be allowed to do it anyway.
Oh, gotcha. Okay. I would agree.
Can I clarify, Mayor?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so the way it's written in the proposal is you could, if you have a 5,000 square foot lot, you could put 6 or 8 units on there. Technically, there's no limitation on that. So you could go up to the maximum height if you wanted to. There's no limitation on it. So that's basically the way it's written. So that's what the concern was.
I want to clarify. When you say 6 to 8 units on a 5,000 square foot, single family home lot. So this would only allow middle housing. So internal conversion of a single family home into a duplex, triplex, or quadplex.
Okay, well, it wasn't written that way in the code amendment. That's my problem was. It didn't specify that at all. It just said there's no minimum requirement is what it wrote. So that's, and I read it to them and that's the way it was. And it was in the code conversions they were sent to us before the packet. I think it was like last Monday.
Oh.
And yeah, if you read through the first one in there below where the minimum lot requirements are per quadplex and everything else, it actually recommends for the internal conversion. It says, I'm paraphrasing of course right now, but basically internal conversions have no minimum lot requirements for additional units.
So that definitely was not the intent. So I just want to be clear about.
That's
what
why
the
we need
intent was.
clarification on that and have it rewritten. So that was my concern. It's the way it's written, it's not working.
So I guess we need to understand, let's focus on the intent. The intent would be to allow a conversion of a middle housing, up to a middle housing type. So nothing beyond a quadplex for an existing home, even if it didn't.
I don't even want a quadplex on a 5,000 square foot lot. That's a lot. I mean, there still needs to be limitations on what we can do.
Okay, so I'm just trying to
So,
understand.
Yeah,
what's-
I mean, a quadplex with parking requirements and everything else, it's gonna be kind of a crazy fit on a small lot or something. I mean, there needs to be some sort of standard written around there, or what those minimum requirements are gonna be.
Okay,
So,
there'd still be a concern even if it was what we're intending, which is up to a quadplex.
yeah,
Sense.
without any sort of restrictions or guidance on it, I think that opens a door for a lot.
Okay.
And if we don't have it written into our code, that allows for anyone wanting to develop it to stretch those boundaries, and then we have to realize then to go back and fix it. Let's assume that someone's going to stretch those boundaries and then write some restraints in there.
Okay, I understand the concern. Thanks.
And Mayor Drinkwine, do you?
Sorry,
agree with
this
that?
is just the internal conversion of an existing home, so not a new quadplex.
Just the internal conversion. The one, I'm
Okay.
trying to find the email so I can actually read it to you guys, but
Here's the section in
It reads, exception for conversions, when a duplex, triplex, fourplex is created, okay, it does say it on the fourplex, okay. Is created internally by converting or expanding the floor area of an existing single-family home dwelling, no minimum lot size shall apply. So if there's a 4,000 or 5,000 square foot lot, and I think we have a 4,000 one over here, for example, you convert that into a quadplex, you can see the problem already, so. But I guess I was wrong. I thought I didn't see that said those first parts in there, so I apologize.
Do the parking rules apply to that with an
So,
internal conversion?
that's one of the recommendations is to allow reduced parking for internal conversions. And in the current draft, it would be one space per unit. So, a fourplex would have to have 4 parking spaces.
So you'd kind of grandfather in the already existing parking that's already there, but you would allow the internal.
That's, yeah, I mean, that's the idea is that if you're requiring, only 10,000 square foot lots and only if there are, 8 parking spaces, that's going to make internal conversions to a plex like almost impossible, except maybe, duplexes might be workable, but you're not going to see probably a lot of quadplexes.
Other than in the new construction areas where the
Right.
zoning allows for it in the 16.
Sure. A new construction, yeah, but this would just be allowing kind of added density when you have an existing dwelling.
Got it.
Okay. So on mine, agree.
Agree, okay. And Counselor Strobel, I muted you. Sorry, I think there was an echo happening.
I'm gonna disagree with this one, just given that there was a misunderstanding of the issue there.
All righty. And Counselor Tenbush?
I also am gonna disagree with the issue because I see the intent.
Okay. And the next concern is proposing to prohibit more than 6 common wall units in a row. And I guess I should ask, look to Kate for some clarification on this one. Would any of our zones with these amendments even allow 6 common walls in a row or more than 6 in a row?
Only the zones where common wall dwellings are already allowed. So in the multifamily zone, R3 and C2 and CR. So all of the sort of higher density residential zones other than R1 and R2 already allow common wall dwellings and don't place any restrictions on how many can be attached in one building. So this would just be consistent with that and not proposing adding restrictions.
Well, I don't think any of us are gonna disagree with this one. I wouldn't I wouldn't want to see anything more. I think when in the initial conversation that we had about this, I said, no more than 4. But yeah, so I would definitely agree that we should not allow more than 6 common wall units in a row.
And just to add one more clarification, just in case that wasn't clear before. So in the R1 zone, the current draft of the code would only allow up to 4 units in a single building. The R2 zone would limit it to 6 units in a single building. So if we're proposing to limit it to 6 anywhere, that would be adding a new restriction in the code that's not there today.
In the R3.
In the R3,
in the
which is
R3.
the zone that's intended for higher density housing. So
There's a second part of that too, is the distance between the buildings is also, I mentioned during that concern. Is if you guys have driven into Sandy, you guys see the townhomes coming in. There's sets of 6 or 8, I think exactly, somewhere, I think it might be 6. But then there's a minimal space where they almost look like they continue the whole way. So there'd need to be some sort of minimal distance between the buildings as well, so that they don't have that same, basically the same concept, but they're jumping in through a loophole and adding 5 feet on between each building on the property offsets, and then continuing it on. So it looks like one big building. We'd want to have some sort of distance requirements. So therefore we don't get that string that we have in there. And that's the example that I'm taking from is the one going into Sandy. So
And do we have any zones, not to just jump in here, but I am. And do we have any zones that are like the R3 that butts up against the R2 or something? So you could put like a 6-wall unit and then it's like few hundred feet and then it's R3. So then you'd have almost like a row. Does that make sense? I'm not sure I understood your, so if we have like an R2 zone next to an R3 or a mixed use commercial, and then you have a 6-walled unit in R2, and then right across the street is a mixed use, and then you continued on, they were able to continue on with that. Is that,
Well, you can do multiple lots in an R2. Well, it doesn't matter, it doesn't have to change zone. So you have 5 lots next to each other in an R2 and they all have 6 units on it. And they have a 5-foot offset between the property lines as required. So you get 10 feet between another 6 units. They basically, it's a run-on set of units
Yeah.
there. And that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
So there'd have to be a minimum requirement of either a property length or something. I don't know how we'd write that.
Yeah.
That's, I don't know exactly what that'd look like. But basically, the whole point is to not do what that they did in Sandy and have this
String.
line of townhomes just going in over and over and over and over. That's not Estacada. So, and that's my concern.
Sure. So the side setback requirements where, you know, the gaps, obviously where the units are attached, there's a 0 setback. But for all the side setbacks, there's 5 feet for each lot. So there would actually be a 10-foot gap required as a
That's
break.
what I said. I
between.
mean,
yeah.
it would have to be where you can't have two townhome spaces concurrent with each other. That'd be an easy way to me to write it. So you can't go townhome, townhome, townhome. It'd be townhome, something else, townhome, something else. That would probably be a way to do it. Breaks it up.
Yeah.
It doesn't give us that length line of townhomes in a row. So that's one way to consider that. So.
Just to clarify what you're suggesting. So a 10-foot gap is not enough.
No.
Okay.
That's what they have in Sandy, and it looks like, unless you look closer, it looks like a long row of townhouses of like 20 or 30 of them.
Okay.
So if you look closely, you'll see the small break between them. So.
I see Melanie's hand is up.
Okay, Melanie?
Thank you. I just want to maybe interpose in here that I don't want to kind of bog down and overthink this. Because I know there's some townhomes up up across from the library, beside the laundromat, beside the real estate and insurance office there. And I'm not sure how many are in that row. And I agree that it kind of looks funky if you have like just all these rows of houses. But I also realize that sometimes they can be done really nicely. And I don't know, I just wonder if we're bogging down a little bit on, trying to micromanage this a little bit too much. Because we're putting like some general requirements here, and now we're, I don't know, it's just I'm getting confused on the details. And so I just want to make sure that if this is what we want to do, let's do it. But also consider that there's, we might be like overthinking this one part of it a little bit. That's all.
So
I don't think we're overthinking it.
I'm
I think it's
wondering,
matters. So.
I'm wondering if I captured Counselor Lickey, what you were saying, which was a possible option to prohibit common wall developments on lots that are immediately adjacent to each other. And we would write it to be, obviously, a common wall dwelling is attached to another one. So those ones might be on separate lots, but they would be attached at the lot line. But what you're talking about is you would have a row of up to 6 common wall dwellings in the same attached building. And then on the next lot, they would not be able to build common wall dwellings there, but then maybe the
Yes.
next lot okay. All right. Got that captured. And I see Paul's.
What would they build in between those common wall dwellings?
You can build a duplex, triplex, something, I don't know, a house. Pick a choice based upon the way it's allowed in that area. So, but anything but another set of row houses. So.
Right, and this would have to be captured. It would only, there's another code provision that we're proposing that would only apply in the case of a subdivision. And so that's really the only way that's the only instance where we would be able to, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Kate, but it would apply if someone was doing a subdivision. That's when we would record or, impose that prohibition on adjacent common wall developments. And so, yes, what Councilor Licky was saying, they would be able, for those other lots that are adjacent to the common wall lots, they could put whatever else is allowed in the underlying zone. It just couldn't be common wall.
Okay.
And Councilor, or, sorry.
Would that impact any of the current development subdivisions that have been proposed that are approved?
It would not, because we would have to capture that in the conditions of approval for the subdivision.
There's not any planned in the current ones that are approved.
No, the current ones are all either single family lots or there's a couple of lots intended for multifamily.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Strobel?
I'm getting confused on this one. I just want to clarify. Is this primarily, we're talking R3 as opposed to R1 or R2? Or the CMUs?
I think what this suggestion would look like is, I'm gonna mute you again because of the echo. I think what the suggestion here would be is anywhere that a common wall, that common wall dwellings could be permitted, there would need to be, if someone was doing a subdivision, there could not be two common wall lots immediately adjacent to each other.
Yeah, we
Okay,
need
I'm
to
good.
figure out how to write it, because I've never seen this provision before, but.
I'm somewhere between disagree with the concern and neutral. So you can put me down as neutral.
Thank you, Councilor Strobel. Councilor Tenbush, how do you feel about the concern? And then how do you feel about that suggestion?
Well, I agree with the concern, well, the initial concern. And I just, so I do have a question. So would a street separating two, so if we did allow 6, so would the street separating the two rows of 6, would that be acceptable, or would that be, they're still on adjacent lots?
I would not consider that adjacent lots.
Yeah, I think a street makes sense. That's 40 to 60 feet between them. So that's
Okay,
the
that's
size
fair.
of a lot. So
That's fair. And then what are our, I should know this, but what are the lengths of our city blocks right now? The minimum length or maximum length, I guess?
That's a hard question for me to know off the top of my head.
Well, I think there's like a maximum of,
There is, yeah. There's a maximum perimeter for a block. I don't remember what it is.
Okay.
I don't know what it is, but I do know that there are some state requirements for what your maximum needs to be or needs to be less than. And it's typically around 400 feet. So, and it's something that'll get addressed as part of your transportation system plan update process, because the consultant team will need to look at and make sure you're being consistent with that state requirement. So if you don't have a 400-foot maximum now, you probably will fairly soon.
so I guess my question is how many 6-row common wall units can you put in that 400 feet? I guess I agree. I'm confused. I agree.
There we go.
Thank you. And Councilor Litkey?
I agree with my recommendation. Yes.
That makes sense. Mayor Drinkwine, how do you feel about the concern and the suggestion?
Agree.
Agreed on both. Counselor Hughes, how do you feel about both?
Agreed on both.
And Counselor McElroy, how do you feel about both?
Agreed on both.
All righty, moving along.
Counselor Strobel has his hand raised also one last time.
Oh, I'm sorry, Counselor Strobel.
Nope, I just gotta lower it here. Sorry.
Thanks.
All right. This next one is the concern is allowing triplexes and quadplexes in the R1 and R2 zones. And the question from us is, would you be satisfied with allowing just triplexes in those zones, but not quadplexes for those reasons that I talked about before? That was kind of a potential compromise that was identified previously. So we'll go in the other direction here. Counselor McElroy, how do you, obviously you agree with your own concern. How do you feel about that compromise?
And just to clarify with my concern, it wasn't just the tri and quadplexes, it was anything other than duplexes or ADUs, including the cottage. I don't know if the cottage clusters and common walls were included in that, but those both, as well as the triplex and quadplexes in the R1 and R2. And I disagree with the compromise.
Okay. So then I think I want to reword this compromise question to allowing 3 unit, but not 4 unit. So 3 units of any type, any middle housing type, or 4 units in the R1, but not 4 unit. Okay, yeah. All right, Counselor Hughes, how do you feel about that concern and then the compromise?
I agree with the concern and I would like to have a discussion on the compromise. I disagree with it, but I think we can hash something out.
Okay. I'll disagree and we can talk about it. Mayor Drinkwine, how do you feel about both?
Agree and disagree.
And Counselor Litke
Same, agree and disagree.
and Counselor Tenbush. You're muted, Counselor Tenbush. I don't know if you've started talking.
Oh, I'm just re-going through it after it was changed, so bear with me just a minute.
Sorry about that.
So, so I agree with the concern. And I agree with the reworded solution.
Okay. And Counselor Strobel.
Tough time on this one. My knee jerk is just to say I disagree with the concern because that's kind of what we're going for here is to loosen requirements to allow more middle housing in Estacada. So I'll stick with that. Disagree with the concern and up for more discussion with the alternate proposal though. So I guess disagree with it just so we can discuss.
Okay. All righty. The next one here is disagree with allowing redevelopment or conversion of single-family homes to tri or quadplexes in the existing single-family neighborhood. So obviously, if we end up prohibiting those uses entirely in the R1 or R2 zone, then this one won't even apply. But if either of those uses are allowed, do you have a concern about allowing the redevelopment of existing single-family homes? So obviously, Counselor McElroy agrees with his own concern. Counselor Hughes, you share that concern?
Agree with the concern.
and Mayor Drinkwine
Agree.
and Counselor Litkey
Agree.
and Counselor Tenbush
I also agree.
and Counselor Strobel.
Disagree with this as well too. I want to clarify though, my understanding is there would need to be a public hearing if someone were to, if I'm thinking the right thing, if they were to convert their home, or is that back to the rezoning? Is this part of the rezoning or?
No, this is not related to the rezoning. This is, if those uses are allowed, they would be allowed outright since we can't make a new conditional use. So they would not have to go to a public hearing in order to create that housing type by internal conversion. Sorry, I muted you again.
I'll stick with the disagree then.
Okay. Okay, looking at the density question, there's a concern about the 50 units per acre density. And I'm going to ask, Kate, is that the number that is being proposed? I feel like I was remembering 30 units per acre, but that might be our.
Yeah, it's 50 units per acre just in the mill area mixed use and central mixed use zones, which are the zones that currently in the current code allow up to 65 feet in building height. So
Okay.
it's 30 units per acre is the proposed standard for the R3 and C2 zones, I believe.
Would the 50% density requirement be applied to that new number as well? So then that nothing could be developed with less than 25 units per acre?
That is,
If
yeah,
that-
that's the way it's written today,
Got it.
or in the current draft. Yeah.
Understood.
Okay, so I've updated this to note that the current proposal is 50 units per acre in the MMU, and I think you said CMU, and then 30 units per acre in the R3 and the C2 zones. So Councillor McElroy, are you also concerned about that, those density levels?
Agree.
And Mayor Drinkwine
Agree.
and Councillor Tenbush?
This is a tough one. I don't like the 50 unit density, but on the other hand, again, this is what we're trying to create that, the housing for affordable housing. So I'm going to go ahead and disagree because I think we need to talk about the amount of units per acre. I think we need more discussion on that.
Okay, and Councillor Strobel?
Disagreeing as well too. And just want to clarify from Councillor Hughes' concern, her initial concern was the 50 units per acre in the MMU and CMU. Does her concern also carry over to the 30 units per acre in the R3 and C2 zones?
My concern's not with the 30 units. I would say that would be my ceiling, would be the 30 units. I just don't want to see the 50 unit.
And I just want to clarify that right now you allow up to about 28 in the zones where we're proposing 30. So 30 is sort of barely increasing it.
Cool.
And it's converting the measurement to a dwelling units per acre instead of a more complicated square foot per unit. So I feel like we sort of expanded the area of concern a little bit in this conversation. It originally was around the 50 units per acre. So I just kind of wanted to put that out there.
Okay.
And understand everybody that said agree, are you agreeing with the 50 only or 50 and 30 in those other zones?
Yes, gotcha.
I don't have a problem with the 30. I had a problem with the 50. And same thing
Yes.
with the 30. It's going to be driving the 50% minimum would be 15 units in those areas, right?
Correct.
And I don't have a problem with that. It's just the 50.
So I guess you could probably maybe tailor delete unless other people, agree with the 30 unit concern, maybe delete that 30 units in the R3 and C2, since everybody's fine with that, but still
Got it.
50 units is fine. Yeah.
Got it. Okay, the next concern is concerned about allowing two ADUs on a lot. Counselor,
Taylor, can I clarify one thing that I didn't mention in my summary? Is that while you can't require an off-street parking space for one ADU, because that's a state requirement, the proposal would be that if you do allow two ADUs, you would require an additional parking space for the second ADU. So if parking was a chief concern, I think that might address at least part of it.
yeah, thank you. Does that change your original concern, Counselor Hughes?
Nope.
Okay, and so let's go down the line. Counselor McElroy?
Both of those ADUs could be rental units, effectively making it a triplex on a single family residence unit, right?
They could be rentals. Uh-huh.
Yeah, I agree with Counselor Charity.
Mayor Drinkwine,
Agree.
Counselor Litkey,
I also agree with Counselor Charity.
Counselor Tenbush,
So just to clarify, allowing two ADUs on a lot, one of them has to be attached to the home as part of the home, and only one can be a detached ADU. Is that correct?
that's correct. So
So one of them, it doesn't change the outside appearance of the home, other than possibly adding a door. So most people wouldn't even know it was there, so I disagree.
Just to clarify, it's in their examples, it gave us an external detached, so it could potentially change the outside of the home as well. So basically it'd be either internal, external attached with and then the additional one could be the detached. So it potentially could change the outside, it could increase the square footage of the home, and then adding an ADU on top of that. So there's three options they put in the examples.
So would people feel better about this proposal if one of the ADUs had to be internal and the other could be either external attached or detached?
I just feel better if there was one ADU allowed.
Yep.
I'm the same place.
Same.
One.
Yeah, ditto.
All right, and Counselor Strobel?
Disagree.
Oops, I keep doing that, sorry. Wrong answer. The next concern here is disagree with adopting the population projection numbers, which we recognize are already outdated at the time of adoption. I'll note that any numbers, any future, buildable lands inventory or housing needs analysis that we are able to do, assuming we're still growing, the numbers will be outdated by the time we get to adopt them.
But they won't be 4 years outdated. They may be 6 months or a year outdated at best, so.
So,
I guess can I ask a quick question?
Uh-huh.
Confused. So the low end was 1.5% growth. The adjusted, the alternate forecast was 2.75%. And the actual growth was closer to 4% over the past 20 years. It doesn't seem like 4 years is the concern. The numbers are probably going to be skewed for growth even in 4 years, right? If they're using the same, they're not using the last 20 years as the growth calculation, right? And that's what you have to use.
Most of that growth happened in the last 2 years, so.
Gotcha.
right, and so one of the issues is that we recognize that PSU's population projections tend in general to be under counting and under projecting. And so that's why we did the alternative projection, which has us growing to, I think, 8,800 in 20 years rather than, what was it, 5,800? But even that, we would want to, and that's to account for the fact that we know that these numbers are outdated. But even with that, like you all were agreeing earlier, we should be updating these numbers every few years. For the purpose of this project, I want to remind you of what Alan was saying at the beginning. We did receive, well, we haven't yet received the grant funds, but we did get awarded a grant for conducting this project. And part of the conditions for that reimbursement are that we adopt an updated housing needs analysis. And so I guess I would encourage you to think about, well, we can adopt these numbers that we know are outdated now and still plan on updating them in a few years down the road. Or we can not adopt the numbers now and plan on updating them in a couple of years. Either way, if we're able to adopt them now, we're getting more updated information into our comp plan than what's currently in there, which are numbers from 1980.
The other thing I'm just going to toss in there is that the reason we did the alternative analysis was because we agree with you. Those numbers are starting out being flawed. When we looked at a significantly higher growth rate and starting out with a more realistic base population, it didn't change the overall finding. The whole reason for kind of those projections, it's sort of twofold. One, to understand what type of housing you need. Two, to understand if you have enough land to accommodate the amount and type of housing that you need. Even if we tripled the growth projections, we would still have a finding that you have enough land within the boundary. Where you would be deficient would be for land to accommodate multifamily housing. We already indicated that in the study, and that's the whole reason behind some of the things that we're recommending. Allowing for the increased density, for instance, in the R3 zone, means you won't have to come back and rezone land as soon. If we come up with a finding that says, hey, you're going to see 3 times this amount of growth, you're going to have to do that much sooner, not just increase the allowed density, but rezone land to accommodate more multifamily. So I don't know that it helps you right now to go back and you'll have to pay somebody to update that analysis. You can't just kind of snap your fingers and update it. So I just want to sort of put those things into the thinking around this.
All right, Taylor.
Yeah, so let's go around on disagreeing with adopting what's currently in the existing conditions section. Counselor Strobel?
I disagree with the concern, especially in light of what was just discussed. It's not going to change the outcome. It would just further amplify the concerns that we're discussing here. So I think it'd be nicer and neater to have better numbers in there, but in order to keep this thing moving forward and keep this thing being productive, I'd like to just disagree with that concern.
Counselor Tenbush?
I also disagree.
Counselor Litke, that was your concern.
Yeah, I believe we owe it to the people of Estacada to give them a good return on it. And rather than just accepting broken stuff, whether or not it changes it or not, we paid $75,000 for it. I think it should be part of their contract to give us good numbers, not outdated numbers. That's, 4 years outdated. 6 months acceptable, maybe a year at most. 4 years outdated numbers. I think we, for $75,000, we owe it to the people of Estacada to require them to provide good numbers within that contract.
Yeah, so we paid $76,000 and then got awarded a $51,000 grant. So if we do adopt findings into the comp plan to satisfy that grant reimbursement, then we will be only actually paying 20.
Is there a deadline on that grant?
Yes, I'm not sure what it is, but there is.
Well, then they better hurry. I agree with my concern.
Counselor, Mayor Drinkwine?
Yeah, we've already agreed to look at those numbers in the future every 4 years, I think, right? So we're gonna update those numbers more frequently now, right? So the concern is that we would fix the problem, right? I'm comfortable with that, so I disagree.
Counselor Hughes?
I'm gonna disagree, just echoing what Counselor Strobel said. Yeah.
Counselor McElroy?
I disagree as well. It's not worth $51,000 if we're gonna update the numbers in a few years.
Alrighty, the last concern on here is 36 feet not being wide enough for parking on both sides with trucks and two-way traffic. Because trucks are wider than the average car. Is this a concern that you share, Counselor McElroy?
I think that'll be addressed with the limitations on the R1 and R2 zones, and that's where I was most concerned about it. I just don't know the implications of what would that change in the code?
I think there's only one part where for common wall dwellings, they could qualify for a parking reduction by one space if they can identify, if there's on-street parking directly adjacent to their lot. So it'd have to be on their frontage, and the street that there's on-street parking on is wide enough to accommodate that on-street parking. So they could have one off-street parking instead of two. And then that street parking would get used.
I would agree with it.
You agree with this concern?
Yes.
Okay. And Counselor Hughes?
I would agree with it, just knowing what people drive around here. Yeah.
Okay. Mayor Drinkwine?
Agree.
Counselor Litke obviously said this concern. Counselor Tenbush?
Just, seeing the state of my own street, I'm gonna agree with this one.
Okay, and Counselor Strobel?
I'll just agree as well too.
Okay. I'm gonna propose that we take a brief break.
Thank you, Taylor. I was just going to propose that myself.
Okay,
I know we have this to finish up, as well as some council business that has to get taken care of. And so I know we want to get to public comment time, but we could take a break here and then come back, and we might have to, I'm not sure what all these changes require. And so I'm concerned that maybe we need to check with the city attorney to make sure that if we're making things more restrictive with these changes, we should check with the attorney, but I'm gonna let Taylor and Matt and Kate talk about that.
we addressed that with the planning commission, but we'll discuss that after the break.
Okay, all right, thank you. We'll be back. Sure, how?
I
I'm not
agree.
sure
I
how-
think we should just get to it on this last thing, tie it up and bring it back on this particular thing after the changes have been made. And then continue on with council business and the urban renewal. We should be able to crank that out pretty quick.
Yeah, so we need to do the public comment time, and then I'm not sure, Taylor, if we should bring this back next time, or if it's ready to vote with these changes. I feel like we might need to give you some time to work on it and bring it back. What do you think?
Yeah, so it looks like there are more changes that are needed in order to reach agreement. We are scoped with our contract with the consultants. We weren't scoped to have multiple planning commission and city council hearings. They already did an extra planning commission meeting, and we're about out of money in our contract with them. So I don't know if they know, if you know, Matt, off the top of your head, if there is enough for you all to capture updating the amendments and then staff could bring it back, or if we would need to amend our contract to have you guys at that next hearing. I don't know if that's a question for the council or Melanie.
It's hard for me to answer that question right now, Taylor, but I guess what I would say is it's 9:45. You've got a lot of people waiting here to testify. I personally, if I was the council, and I can't speak for you, I would want to bring this back. I would not want to try to make a decision, start making a decision at 10:15 tonight, but it's up to you. I mean, and so I would suggest we talk about that later, Taylor, but in terms of our involvement in that next council meeting and what we can do in terms of set up potential changes. I just think it's going to take more discussion though. I really do. And I wouldn't want to keep people waiting much longer to testify. And I also wouldn't want to, I just never think there's great outcomes when a group of people try to work it out at 10:15.
Yeah.
So that's just me. I mean, I've been at lots of planning commission and council meetings where it's gone that late and it just doesn't seems like people get tired, diminishing returns. So
I think
that's my
Matt's spot
opinion.
on. He's got it. He's right.
But I would
Okay.
definitely take public testimony so people have a chance to, you
Yep.
know, do that. They've been waiting a long time. But I wouldn't go.
Yeah, so let's do that, do the public testimony, and then we'll figure out whether staff can bring it back or whether we need to do a contract amendment. We can work on that later.
Okay, so I should probably read the statement of evidence first, right? Okay, so a statement about evidence presented at the hearing, an issue which may be the basis for an appeal to LUBA must be raised prior to the close of the record at the final eventuary hearing on the specific application. Such issue shall be raised with sufficient specificity so as to afford LUBA and the parties an adequate opportunity to respond to each issue. Failure of an issue to be raised at the hearing or in person or by letter, or failure to provide sufficient specificity to afford LUBA and the parties an adequate opportunity to respond to the issue precludes appeal to LUBA on that issue. Okay, now it's, does any member of the audience wish to speak? And I have one that has put in a form that wishes to speak now and then later. Is that right? Okay, Trina Feldman. No, sure. Just go ahead and use the microphone there. We got it on record. Yeah.
You got to use the microphone for record.
I think it's a great idea. As a city, put as many houses as you can. Do another Campanella, get them right together, cookie cutter houses. Get all those property taxes you can. It's a great idea. It doesn't work so much for me that's been here 28 years. I came here for a small town. I'm moving. I'm selling my house. Too late for me. I'm gone. You already got too many for me. But that's a win too for the city. Because see, I moved here 28 years ago. My property taxes, I'm assessed at 200,000 on a $450,000 house. So your profits will go up there too. What I might recommend is if you want big city, you're getting it. You're right on track to get that big city. It's doing great. If not, maybe you should look at who all is telling you, let's get all this middle housing. Let's get all that. You got people in the city that are going, oh yeah, let's make it bigger. Let's make it bigger. They don't even live here. Do all the city people live here? Do they deal with this? Do they drive down Shafford and see that even though we have bump outs, if cars park on each side, 2 cars cannot go down it. I just drove down it and had to stop, wait for a car to come. Then I went, it's just like driving in Portland. Great, don't want it myself. But if that's what the city wants, you guys are right on track. So keep it up. Thanks.
And any other wishes to speak during this?
We
Go ahead,
have,
Kurt.
okay.
Where'd that
Yeah,
go?
Dog didn't want me to talk. Again, my name's Kurt. So all these proposed changes, who are they for? Potential new residents of Estacada, right? By the way, there's 1.44 million cars registered in Oregon. I just found that out. So I don't know how many of you have 2 people, 2 adults in the house. Everybody's got a car. But I guess my main point is, what is this doing for the current residents? I sent the entire city council. You missed that email, Mike. Be happy you didn't get it. You guys are doing stuff, and I'm not saying it's you guys that are here. It's people that are in offices here. They're changing the core of Estacada. To Joel's point earlier, Estacada is not going to be Estacada anymore. We're looking out and we're trying to go 2 cars deep on the side of the streets. We can't grow anymore. And I guarantee you what, 90% of the people that have moved here in the last 2 years, if you would have told them they would be living in Estacada 4 years ago, they would have laughed at you. If the only reason you're moving here is for cheap rent, I don't want you here, because that means you're allowing the same failed policies from where you left to come out to here. And I see it trickling down. It's going down the drain. And that's what's happening right now.
Thank you, Kurt. Anybody else wish to speak? No? Okay, we're done with the audience. So you want to stop it there? We leave this public hearing open, is that right? Melanie?
Taylor, or I was gonna let Taylor go ahead and respond to that.
Yeah, I think I guess I don't know. Don't they need to vote to continue the hearing? Would that close the public hearing? What?
Right, because the hearing would be over unless Matt wants to weigh in on that.
Well, and also there are 2 hands on the Zoom that didn't get to talk. So
okay,
I'm gonna the first one I saw was TP. Trying to bring
I
them in.
can't see them, so who are they?
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Hey, I'm Tara. I'm on the planning committee. Planning commission, sorry. I've been the one person to vote against a lot of the developments. I would be delighted, honestly, if there was never another house built in Estacada, but that isn't possible here. We're required to address growth, and we're legally required to address it, and we're legally required to accommodate different kinds of housing. So that was one of the reasons why I did vote for this when I went through the planning commission. And I guess my question here is, there's a lot of no's and a lot of kind of going through and gutting, some of these changes, which are really meant to allow a greater density in a very small area. And my question is, what is being offered as a solution instead? What is it that what is the solution to growth? What is the solution to the legal requirements for offering different kinds of housing, offering affordable housing, offering middle housing, if it's not to make these minor changes, really relatively minor changes in a very close an area? Because if we don't increase the density, and if we refuse to make development of middle housing feasible, what we're doing is encouraging sprawl. We'd be looking at an expansion of the UGB down the road. And to me, that's a really fast way to look like Happy Valley. And that's a fast way to eat up the farmland and the trees and all the stuff that makes people want to live in Estacada. And, I keep hearing people say small town, and I get that. And I feel that way too, but I think that we need to have, it's a really subjective term, and it means different things to different people. And to my mind, approving these massive single family subdivisions, we've got a 240 lot subdivision on our next docket, approving these huge subdivisions, that's not that doesn't look like a small town to me, but it's, these things come off without a hitch. And the reality is the only people who can afford these houses that start at 500K are wealthy people. There are no affordable starter homes and virtually no rentals in this town. And there aren't places for people who work the kinds of jobs we have here, which are, primarily retail and light manufacturing, to live. They can't afford to live here. They can't afford to start families here. And the people who can afford to live here have to work somewhere else. So that makes us a gentrifying bedroom community in my mind. That's not what a small town is. So I guess I'd love to have some shared definitions of what these things mean when we're all talking, and what concretely this means. And I'd love to hear some other solutions to accommodating this stuff over the long term.
Okay, thank you for that. Who else do we have on there?
There
There's
is
some-
also a Brandy Litke.
Okay, Brandy?
Can you guys hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Hello?
I think you kicked her off for a second there.
Oh, I meant, sorry, hang on. Zoom switches around who I'm clicking on. Hang on a second.
I got it too.
Thank you.
Can you
Hey,
guys hear
Brandy?
me?
Yeah.
Hi.
Sorry.
Hi. That's okay. My quick question is, it was kind of confusing, and I do hope you guys table this till later. It was a little bit confusing when you guys talked about the compromise for the parking spot. I was under the impression that it meant you guys were compromising for the under 7,500 feet, and then still above 7,500 feet, you were still going to do the 2 parking spots per unit. But other people I was talking to when I left said that that's not what the compromise was. I would urge you guys to look at what's happening at this unit that you guys got an award for over by Ace Hardware. They're now parking in the Ace Hardware parking lot because they have nowhere to park, and it's causing severe problems. Parking is an issue. It's not something to not think about. I would say everybody needs to be able to park, and narrowing that down any less than 2 per unit is just not realistic. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, do we have anybody else?
I don't see any other hands raised.
Okay. So that's the audience participation, and now we say we have to vote to close this.
So here's, I think, what your options might be. One, you can close oral public testimony. You could keep the record open for written comments and continue the hearing to a future meeting. 2, you could keep the public record open and accept both verbal and written testimony at a subsequent hearing, and continue the hearing. 3, you could try to finish up tonight. So I think it's really about, if you're going to continue the hearing, it's really about whether or not you close public testimony, either for oral testimony or written, or both tonight.
Okay. So what is your recommendation, Melanie, at this point?
Yeah, I would definitely, I would recommend the option to close the oral public testimony, but keep written public testimony open until our next meeting, and then continue the hearing until October 24th. So people know, if you state that date, then they'll know when they can come back, and when would they have to have their written testimony in by?
Just by 4 p.m. on the day of the hearing.
Okay. So for all written testimony, it could continue to come in till 4 p.m. on October 24th, and then this would be, the hearing would be continued at that council meeting on October 24th. If
Okay.
you guys are up for that, unless you want to continue, but I don't recommend continuing.
No, I think we'll do that. How would I close it at this point is what I'm asking. How do we?
Let's have a motion to close the hearing to verbal testimony. Is that right? How I would say that? Here, and you can just copy this. Make a motion to close the verbal testimony, leaving written testimony open until 4 p.m. October 24th, and to continue this hearing at the council meeting on October 24th.
So moved.
And Jerry has his hand up.
Jerry.
So, if we close verbal testimony, then any changes that are made that we discuss at the public hearing on the 24th, the public doesn't have any say or can't come back with any comments if we close verbal testimony, and written testimony has to be submitted by 4 o'clock that day. I don't know if I agree with that. I think we leave it open, both oral and written, just because we definitely want input from the public on, you know, a decision that's going to be made after they're allowed to comment. So that's my 2 cents.
Okay, good suggestion. I think somebody said so moved on that. So if they want to recall that, I have my rules here. To withdraw that motion. Or it would die for lack of a second if there wasn't a second yet, and then you can make a new motion. You would still be, I think the way that it goes is that you would still have public testimony and then the final decision be made after that. But if you want to leave it open for verbal, that's fine with me too. I mean,
Okay, who's got a motion on the floor?
I'll withdraw the motion and amend the motion, or I guess I have to withdraw the motion.
I'll make the motion to leave the verbal and written open for the next meeting on the 24th.
And I'll second it.
Okay, first and second, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. Done.
great, thank you.
And then we just, I close this out, go back into the next one, right? Okay, and then we're reopening the city council. All right.
So can I just wrap it up? I move to table resolution 2022-012. Resolution of the Estacada City Council adopting an intergovernmental agency. Nope, I retract that, sorry.
Yeah, please retract that.
I retract that.
Wait,
I
wait,
retract
yeah.
that. I thought that was a motion on the housing. Sorry. I
No,
retract
you-
that.
Oh, no.
We're done with that.
Sorry.
Okay, thank you. I was
It's
gonna
late,
pa-
guys. It's late.
I was just gonna panic for just a
No,
minute.
no, so council business. First on council business, we have a resolution 2022-012, a resolution of the Estacada City Council adopting an intergovernmental agreement with the Estacada Urban Renewal Agency regarding enhancement construction on Southeast Main Street. So we all know what that's about. You've all read about it. So do I have any questions on that before we go into a motion? No? So I have a motion on the floor?
I move to approve resolution 2022-012, resolution of the Estacada City Council adopting an intergovernmental agreement with the Estacada Urban Renewal Agency regarding the enhancement of construction of Southeast Main Street.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, I have first and second. All those in favor say aye.
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 All those opposed? Motion passes. Thank you. Next, we have a resolution 2022-013, a resolution of the Estacada City Council authorizing a loan from the SPWF by entering into a finance contract with Oregon IFA. Do I have a motion on the floor?
I move to approve resolution 2022-013.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, 3 seconds there. All those in favor say aye.
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 All those opposed? Motion passes. Thank you. Next, we have a resolution 2022-021, a resolution of the city of Estacada City Council to authorizing and approving a DEQ state revolving fund loan to finance the wastewater system improvement project. Do I have a motion on the floor?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
First and second, all those in favor say aye.
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 All those opposed? Motion passes. Thank you. Last on the list, I have an approval of the RFP for wastewater treatment plant design, engineering and permitting. I have a motion on the floor.
Motion to approve RFP for wastewater treatment plant design, engineering and permitting.
Do I have a second?
Second.
First and second, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Okay. Motion passes. Thank you all for that. We are at the next citizen and community group comment. Trina, you were on here as well.
I would like Estacada to change and do some kind of law or whatever that you can't beg inside the city limits of Estacada. We've got a family that takes their children and uses them to get money. They've been kicked out of Sandy. They've been kicked out of a bunch of places. I've given the lady a job application at Home Depot in Clackamas. Maybe we should start getting something so we don't have this issue and it turns into more Portland. Maybe we could, I don't know if you guys can do that. I would imagine you could, since you made it so you can't be naked on your yard. So I would imagine you can make it so you can't bum money on the streets.
All right. Thank you, Trina. Yeah. so-
I actually looked into that. There's a state law that you can't put an ordinance against panhandling. We can't outlaw panhandling, but there are other things that I believe the city's looking into a little bit on that area. Is that correct, Melanie?
Yes, thank you. I was just gonna comment if you would like me to. I can double check with our law enforcement about how we can engage or maybe some I don't know if the behavioral health specialists would help with that. But I think we could look into ways, especially if for those who appear to be professional panhandlers. I know obviously people if they need help, we want to direct them to where they can actually get help. And if it's something that is more of a professional type of a way of life, then we want to help them to do something else. So let me check on that and see what we could do.
Yeah, look under some loitering laws, Melanie. I believe that's how some cities have handled it. So.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Now I don't have any other citizens. I don't have anybody online chiming in, do I? Nobody else who should speak? Okay,
I see Brandy Litke's hand is up.
is she still? Brandy, are you wanting to speak again?
No, that was from before. I apologize.
All right, great, thank you. We are now at mayor and council reports and comments. So I will start off with you, Mike, your first comment. What do you think?
I just wanted to clarify that I don't want to discourage all middle housing, but the city has already set aside places for that to be developed. I was just trying to discourage it from them blanketing the entire city in all residential areas, including existing residences with triplexes, quadplexes. It's going to change the dynamic of those neighborhoods. And people made a financial commitment to move into those neighborhoods and then to have things change all around them without any say so in the matter. I didn't think that was very fair to existing neighborhoods. And that was the spirit behind my disagreement with a lot of the changes that were being brought forward.
I'll keep it brief. There is a lot of discussion tonight and the hour is late. So I just want to thank everybody here tonight coming out. I see you guys come here every council meeting and I really, really appreciate all your community involvement. I think it's awesome that you're doing that. I mean, so, and thanks to staff for putting together a massive packet and doing a very good job. And I would like to wish all those who are not feeling too hot to trot, get better, guys. Hope to see you next meeting. And that's all I got.
Okay. Jerry.
I wasn't expecting that. You skipped Joel. No, thanks staff. The amazing information. I got through it all and went through it again, and it was a good packet. A lot of information. Thank you guys for the great discussion tonight, and I'm glad it was discussion. There's a lot of stuff in there that I really feel that is good, but there's a lot of stuff that might not be worded correctly, and numbers not correct. So thank you guys for coming. Sorry I wasn't there tonight. I have to, put mine and my family's health first. So I appreciate you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul.
Thanks also for the great discussion tonight, and kudos to the planning staff there for their organized approach to facilitate the discussion tonight too. So great job to them, and look forward to working through this more with all of you.
Thank you. Joe.
So I have a 30-page speech here. Just kidding. No, I have a couple things I do want to cover. I mentioned earlier about Councilor Dunsmuir in the minutes. I did that because I think it's absolutely important to identify that there's a certain quorum amongst councilors that were a level of respect, not for just each other, but also for the people that they're here to represent. They gave trust in us to be here. And that means that we need to be here for them. And that means that when we have personal things or we're upset about something, we need to set that aside because it's about the people of Estacada. And to leave a meeting early without one being dismissed by the chair of the meeting is extremely disrespectful to the council and to the chair. The second part is it's extremely disrespectful for a counselor to leave a meeting early, just walk out. I really hope that we can, as a council, hold a higher bar to each other and to not violate our own council rules on many things. That includes respect. That includes going through and having discussion. And I hold myself to this as well. A motion made at an odd time. It's not against the rules, but it's not good courtesy. And so it's something I've learned from the previous meetings. But at the same time, I've lost on votes before, and I've had things made out of turn before, and I still was able to hold respect to stand here and to continue to serve, because that's what I'm here, is to serve. So it was extremely disrespectful, and I would hope that Councilor Dunsmuir, upon her return, would be willing to give an apology to the people of Estacada for her actions, because I felt it was way out of line for what she did. With that, I thank staff for all the work that's been going on. We had a great meeting, or what's it called, the retreat.
League of Oregon Cities.
League of Oregon Cities. Thank you. It was a really good conference there. Learned a lot from that, and have a lot to bring back with that. I'm not going to waste your time now with some of that, but I'll go ahead and shut up and let my drink wine go.
Okay, well, a couple things here. I just wanted to comment on the one woman who said, why are we questioning these things on the housing needs analysis, and why are we making a point of it? At the end of each day, and Trina and those guys brought this up, our town is growing, and it's inevitable. It will grow. We can't stop it. We know that. But we are here to ask the question. So when you ask why we ask all these questions, or why we put these obstacles in the way, it's because we are, at the end of the day, managing growth. That's what this is all about. Managing how fast we grow and the way we grow. That is what we're supposed to do, and that's why we did it. So that's what we have to understand when you ask us why we ask all these questions or why we change these things, it's because they weren't right. And at the end of all this, we have to have that discussion until we get it right. That's who it comes to. So that is why we ask those questions. On the other part of this, the audience, I respect you more than you know for sitting out there and listening to this for the last 4 hours and still hanging in there. So thank you for everything that you do in a day. We will keep up the fight. And on the last part of that, the League of Oregon Cities was a very wonderful experience. It was great to see everybody out there and shake hands with other cities that are suffering the same issues we are, and kind of giving an idea on how we can help ourselves. I would recommend it to anybody who joins the council to try to make one of those, try to be a part of it. It's worth the experience. And in that, I thank each and every one of you for being here tonight. And that is all I have. So thank you. The city council meeting is now adjourned. We will move into the urban renewal real quick. It should take just a few minutes.
If I think Jerry and Paul and I need to log out and get back into the urban renewal meeting in case anybody's been sitting there for 2 hours waiting for it. But we'll jump out quick and be right back to start that up.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
Yep.